Welcome to the night shift, where park rangers patrol America's darkest forests. Out here, the Wendigo stalks, the skinwalker calls your name, and something ancient watches from the shadows. Your radio won't save you. The job listing appeared when I needed it most. Park ranger, remote station, Kenai Wilderness, Alaska. My eyes lingered on the screen as something within me awakened. I, Taiga Kaskai, had spent years drifting through meaningless city jobs, feeling increasingly disconnected from my Dena'ina heritage. My grandmother once told me our name meant one who listens to the forest. In that moment, staring at those words, I felt as if the wilderness itself was calling me home. 3 weeks later, I stood before my assigned cabin beside Mirror Lake, 90 miles from the nearest town. The weathered structure sat nestled against towering black spruce, its dark windows reflecting the still water beyond. Senior Ranger Morris handed me the keys with a thin smile. "Welcome to Outpost 17, he said, eyes shifting toward the tree line. "Radio check-in every morning at 0800. Emergency protocols in the manual. Search and rescue equipment in the shed." He hesitated. "Stay on marked trails after dark." "Any particular reason?" I asked. His expression tightened. "Terrain's treacherous. People get lost." Before departing, Morris paused at his truck. "One more thing. Visitors might mention noises. Forest acoustics play tricks out here. Log everything, but don't encourage wild stories." Alone, I explored my new home. The cabin was practical. Wood stove, kitchen, radio equipment, bedroom and office space, filled with topographical maps. A worn journal sat on the desk. Inside, previous rangers had recorded incidents, weather patterns, and wildlife sightings. The most recent entry caught my attention. April 18th. Found abandoned campsite near Whispering Creek. Tent shredded, gear scattered across 50 yards. No blood, no bodies. Search team found nothing. Third incident this season. That night, unpacking by lamplight, I heard it for the first time. A deep, resonant howl, unlike any wolf or bear. It echoed across the lake, seeming to vibrate through the cabin's wooden bones. The sound triggered something primal in me, raising goosebumps along my arms. I told myself it was just a curious animal, but deep down, I recognized the call as something ancient, something territorial. My first week passed quickly, filled with patrol routes, wilderness regulations, and equipment checks. I met a few hikers, mostly experienced outdoorsmen respecting nature's boundaries. But on day 9, everything changed when the radio crackled to life. "Outpost 17. We have a potential search and rescue. Over." A family of 4 had vanished near Blackwater Ridge, 15 miles from my cabin. Their emergency beacon had activated briefly before going silent. With gathering clouds threatening a storm, I packed rescue gear and headed into the wilderness. The coordinates led me to an abandoned campsite, sleeping bags unzipped as if vacated in haste, food still hanging in trees. No signs of animal attack, no blood, just 4 sets of footprints heading north toward forbidden territory, followed by something with a stride twice as long as a human's. The path led deeper into increasingly dense forest. Ancient trees blocked the fading daylight, creating a premature twilight beneath their canopy. The temperature dropped noticeably. I found the first strange structure as darkness approached. Branches woven between trees forming an archway 10 feet tall. Too deliberate to be natural, too primitive to be man-made. Fresh breaks in the wood suggested recent construction. Beyond the arch, the forest fell unnaturally silent. I should have turned back. Protocol demanded I radio my position and wait for backup. Instead, something pulled me forward. The same instinct that had drawn me to Alaska, perhaps, or something deeper in my Dena'ina blood, recognizing an ancient truth. The missing family's trail led to a clearing where I found a child's stuffed animal beside an enormous footprint pressed deep into the soft earth. The impression measured 22 inches, with 5 distinct toes and a pressure pattern suggesting something weighing at least 800 pounds. Night was falling fast. I marked the location and prepared to make camp when I noticed the eyes, dozens of reflective points watching from the forest's edge, too high off the ground to be wolves, too numerous to be bears. I reached for my radio, but only static answered. Thunder rolled overhead as rain began to fall, washing away the footprints before me. The watching eyes blinked out one by one until darkness consumed everything. That night, huddled beneath an emergency shelter, I heard them, voices calling through the rain. Not the missing family, but something mimicking human sounds, trying words that didn't quite fit in its throat. The voices circled my camp, sometimes whispering directly outside my thin shelter. "Hello, help, cold." I clutched my rifle and watched shadows move against my tent, massive humanoid figures standing upright. One pressed its face against the fabric, breathing heavily, a silhouette twice the size of any man. Morning brought no trace of the night's visitors, but I found broken branches 15 feet above ground level and a series of complex structures, stick formations arranged in patterns that nagged at my memory. My grandmother had shown me similar arrangements once, warning me never to disturb them. "Territory markers," she'd said. "Not everything in the woods wants to be found." I located the missing family around noon, huddled in a cave, terrified but unharmed. Their story spilled out in fragments. "Something followed us from the moment we arrived," the father said, eyes darting toward the cave entrance. "Throwing rocks at our tent, making sounds." "It stood outside our tent," the mother whispered. "We could see its shadow, enormous." Their teenage son described how they'd fled in the night after something began tearing at their tent. "It herded us here," he said, "blocked every path except the one leading to this cave." The youngest daughter simply drew pictures in the dirt, tall, hairy figures with long arms standing among trees. I radioed our position and began leading them back toward safety. The forest felt different now, watchful, tense, branches seeming to reach toward us as we passed. We were being followed, not pursued, escorted. Something large paralleled our course, always just out of sight, breaking branches deliberately to announce its position. As we approached the lake, I caught my first clear glimpse through a gap in the trees. A massive figure, at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark fur, watching our procession with unsettling intelligence. When it noticed my attention, it melted into the forest with impossible grace for its size. That night, after delivering the family to safety, I returned to my cabin and opened the old journal again. Flipping to the earliest entries, I found what I sought. Detailed accounts dating back decades describing encounters with forest guardians, territorial entities that protected certain regions from human encroachment. One entry from 1976 stood out. "They're intelligent. They know we watch them. Sometimes they watch back. Territorial boundaries must be respected or consequences follow. Not malevolent unless provoked. Ancient pact with native peoples, certain areas forbidden to humans." I realized then that I stood at a crossroads, caught between worlds. The wilderness had called me here for a purpose. Something ancient recognized the blood flowing through my veins, and now it was watching, waiting to see what kind of guardian I would become. Outside my window, something moved at the forest's edge. Eyes reflected the moonlight, patient, evaluating, claiming territory. I had been right about the job calling to me, but I hadn't understood that I wasn't the only one doing the hiring. After the incident with the family, reports filtered in from across my territory. Hikers describing strange calls in the night, rangers finding elaborate stick structures, and research stations documenting unprecedented wildlife behavior. Animals were migrating away from certain regions, as if fleeing something that frightened even the predators. I began mapping the encounters, revealing a pattern centered on an unexplored valley 20 miles northwest of Mirror Lake. The area appeared on official maps as Geological Research Zone, permanently closed to visitors. My inquiries about this designation were met with bureaucratic deflection. "That's been restricted since before my time," Supervisor Jenkins told me over a crackling radio connection. "Environmental sensitivity issues. Focus on your assigned patrol areas." But the incidents kept occurring, each one closer to established trails. 2 weeks after my first encounter, an experienced hunter arrived at my cabin at dawn, his hands shaking as he clutched a plaster cast. "Found these tracks near Granite Creek," he said, placing the cast on my table. 20 years hunting these woods, never seen anything like it." The cast showed a massive humanoid footprint with dermal ridges visible in the impression, anatomically impossible for a bear or other known wildlife. I felt watched the entire trip, he confessed. Second night, something circled my camp for hours, throwing rocks, breaking branches. I packed up at first light and found my trail back blocked with trees that had been snapped like twigs. I documented his account while keeping my own experiences private. That afternoon, I hiked to Granite Creek and found the location from his description. The entire area had been transformed since his departure. Dozens of trees snapped midway up their trunks, their broken tops arranged in elaborate patterns pointing toward the restricted valley. A territorial display, a warning. I photographed everything before continuing deeper into the territory. The forest changed subtly the farther I ventured. Older trees unmarked by human tools, undergrowth arranged in patterns too consistent for natural growth. The air grew dense with the scent of decay and something musky, primeval. At sunset, I discovered evidence of an abandoned research camp, scientific equipment scattered among rotting canvas tents. Documentation dated it to 1978, though no official record mentioned a government presence here. Journal fragments described observation of subject specimens and territorial behaviors before abruptly ending mid-sentence. I made camp nearby, securing my perimeter with motion sensors borrowed from the ranger station. As darkness fell, the forest's atmosphere shifted palpably. Wind ceased. Insects fell silent. Even my breathing seemed muffled by the unnatural stillness. The motion sensors triggered at 2:17 a.m., all 8 simultaneously, an impossibility, unless multiple large objects breached my perimeter at once. I clutched my rifle, scanning the darkness beyond my tent. They didn't try to conceal themselves this time. Massive shadows moved between trees, silhouetted against the night sky. I counted 7 distinct figures, all upright, all at least 8 feet tall. They communicated through a complex language of clicks, whistles, and deep vocalizations that registered more as pressure against my chest than audible sound. One approached closer than the others, massive shoulders hunched beneath thick fur, face hidden in shadow. It carried something in its elongated arms, dropping the object at the edge of my camp before retreating. Dawn revealed their offering, a deer carcass, freshly killed, placed with its head pointing toward my cabin miles away. A message even I could interpret. They knew where I lived. Beside the deer lay a worn leather wallet containing a driver's license issued to Dr. Malcolm Reed, dated 1978, a researcher from the abandoned camp who officially had retired to Florida, according to records I'd checked. The creatures were communicating deliberately, demonstrating both intelligence and historical knowledge. I returned to my cabin to find Ranger Morris waiting, his expression grim as he examined my photographs. "You need to drop this," he said without preamble. "The restricted area remains restricted for good reason." "People are encountering something out there," I countered. "If we know what it is." "We know." His interruption carried such certainty that I fell silent. "Why do you think this outpost exists? We're not here to protect people from getting lost. We're maintaining a boundary." Morris revealed what official training had omitted. Outpost 17 had been established in 1973, following a series of violent encounters with what authorities classified as unknown indigenous wildlife. The government's first approach had been research and possible capture. After losing 3 research teams, policy shifted to containment and observation. "There's a reason your predecessor left," Morris said, "started seeing them near the cabin, claimed they were leaving him messages." "What kind of messages?" Morris hesitated, warning him away from certain areas, then inviting him into others. That night, reviewing territorial maps, I noticed what generations of researchers had documented. The creature's territory expanded and contracted seasonally. Current activity suggested a territorial expansion phase, coinciding with increased human presence in the wilderness. Near midnight, I heard familiar heavy footsteps on my porch. Something scraped against my door, not attempting entry, but leaving marks. By morning, deep gouges formed a pattern in the wood that triggered another ancestral memory, Dena'ina boundary symbols marking forbidden territory. The creatures were reconsidering where humans belonged, and my cabin now stood on contested ground. 3 hikers disappeared the following weekend, last seen near Whispering Creek. Their abandoned campsite displayed the now familiar signs: gear scattered, strange footprints, elaborate stick structures. But this time, blood stained the forest floor, drag marks leading toward the restricted valley. The search team assembled at my cabin, 6 rangers including Morris, all armed with tranquilizer rifles and live ammunition. Their equipment included items more suited for military operations than wildlife management. "We maintain the boundary, contain incidents, and preserve deniability," Morris explained, checking a weapon I didn't recognize. "These tranks would drop an elephant if they don't work." He patted his sidearm. "Have you had to use those before?" I asked. The absence of response answered clearly enough. We deployed at dusk, following tracks that made no effort to conceal their path. The creatures were leading us deliberately, drawing us deeper into their territory as darkness descended. Bare branches clawed at the darkening sky above us as we penetrated forests increasingly dominated by territorial markers. 8 miles in, we found the first hiker, unconscious but alive, placed carefully beside a stream, his injured leg crudely but effectively splinted with branches and plant fibers. Morris administered medical aid while the rest of us established a defensive perimeter. "They've never returned one alive before," he whispered, genuine confusion in his voice. The radio crackled with reports from the other search teams. The remaining hikers had been found in similar states, strategically placed near trails, their injuries treated with surprising medical knowledge. As we prepared evacuation, I noticed sophisticated stick structures surrounding our position. Not warnings this time, but arrangements resembling the ancient Denaina symbol for parley, a request for communication. Then we heard them, not hiding now, but approaching openly. Massive figures materialized from the darkness, surrounding our position. The largest stopped 30 yards away, its breathing visible in the cold air, its size challenging comprehension. Not monsters from horror stories, but flesh and blood beings with a presence that commanded primal respect. Morris raised his rifle. "Hold position. They've never approached like this." The leader dropped to a crouching position, placing something on the ground before retreating several steps, an invitation to examine its offering. Protocol demanded withdrawal. Every instinct screamed danger. But something deeper, something connected to my heritage, recognized this moment as significant. I stepped forward despite Morris's protest. On the ground lay items from the abandoned research camp, journals, photographs, and scientific instruments arranged deliberately. The message was sophisticated beyond anything they'd previously attempted. "They're returning government property," I realized aloud. "They're making a statement about boundaries." The creatures watched my reaction, their eyes reflecting intelligence and purpose. One gestured toward the direction of my cabin, then swept its arm across the broader territory in a motion that needed no translation. This far, no further. As we retreated with the recovered hikers, I felt their presence parallel our movement, not threatening but escorting us back across an invisible line, a negotiated withdrawal. Back at the cabin, Morris received orders from regional headquarters, increased patrols, expanded warning systems, and a classified directive I wasn't authorized to see. "Something's changed in their behavior," he admitted as search teams departed. 40 years maintaining distance. Now they're sending messages, returning people alive. They want something. Alone again, I examined the deep gouges in my door, tracing patterns that resonated with half-remembered lessons from my grandmother. The creatures had marked my cabin as significant, not as target, I realized, but as boundary post. They had recognized something in me, something that made me different from other rangers who had served here. That night, I dreamed of massive figures moving through ancient forests, watching as human settlements expanded into their territory century after century. In the dream, they observed me through my windows, evaluating, considering. Not monsters, but intelligent beings making calculated decisions about coexistence and territory. I awoke to find fresh tracks in the mud outside my cabin. A deliberate circle walked around my home, marking it as a place of significance, in whatever complex social structure governed their kind. The wilderness had called me here for a reason. The creatures had recognized the ancient blood flowing through my veins. Now they were watching, evaluating what kind of guardian I would become in this contested borderland between worlds. I stood at my window, staring into the darkness beyond the glass. Something huge moved between distant trees, not hiding its presence. "I understand," I whispered, knowing it could hear me. "You're setting boundaries." In response, a distant call echoed across the lake, not threatening but acknowledging. Establishing communication. The true nature of my job was becoming clearer. I wasn't just a park ranger protecting humans from wilderness. I was becoming something much older, a guardian of boundaries between worlds that were never meant to fully separate. The next 3 weeks brought an uneasy equilibrium. Hikers reported strange sounds and found complex stick structures near trails, but no further disappearances occurred. My daily patrols revealed clear territorial markings, boundaries established through broken trees, arranged stones, and occasional massive footprints deliberately left where I would find them. They were communicating their terms, creating a map I was learning to read. Each morning I documented new markings around the cabin, evidence of nighttime visitors who never approached the buildings but established a perimeter, watching, studying. Whatever these creatures were, they demonstrated patience and intelligence that defied conventional wildlife management approaches. Regional headquarters began requesting more frequent reports, particularly about behavioral patterns of unidentified wildlife. Their sudden interest suggested higher authorities were taking notice. Twice I observed unmarked helicopters passing over restricted areas, maintaining high altitude, but clearly conducting surveillance. Morris visited weekly, his concern evident as he reviewed my documentation of territorial markers. "Has department policy changed?" I asked during one such visit. "There seems to be increased attention to these incidents." Morris chose his words carefully. "Let's just say certain theories about these creatures are gaining traction in places that matter. Indigenous knowledge being reconsidered alongside scientific observation." He shared redacted reports documenting similar incidents across remote wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, Alaska, and northern Canada. Patterns suggesting not isolated anomalies, but an intelligent species maintaining deliberate separation from human civilization. "The official position remains wildlife management," Morris emphasized. "Keep civilian encounters to a minimum, document but don't publicize, maintain boundaries without confrontation." After he left, I found a thumb drive he'd accidentally left behind. It contained classified footage from 1978, researchers attempting communication with the creatures through arranged objects, recorded vocalizations, and territorial respect rituals adapted from indigenous practices. The experiments had shown promise until military authorities redirected research toward capture attempts. The footage ended with thermal imaging of researchers fleeing as massive figures demolished their camp with coordinated efficiency. That night I dreamed of my grandmother teaching me Dena'ina stories, tales of ancient agreements between our people and the tall ones who walk between worlds. In the stories, they weren't monsters but guardians of wilderness, with whom our ancestors had established mutual boundaries. "They remember every promise, every betrayal," she'd told me. "They think in generations, not moments." I awoke to find fresh markings outside, not threatening demonstrations, but informative patterns. A map drawn in disturbed earth showing trails marked safe for human presence and zones designated as forbidden. The level of communication suggested they recognized my position as something beyond ordinary ranger duties. They saw me as potential intermediary. The morning radio check brought unexpected news. 5 researchers from a prominent university had received rare permits to conduct environmental studies near Mirror Lake. They would be using my cabin as base camp for 2 weeks. Morris's voice carried a warning beneath official notification. "These researchers have certain theories they're eager to prove. Keep them on authorized trails only." The research team arrived that afternoon, 4 men and 1 woman driving university vehicles loaded with scientific equipment far beyond standard environmental research needs. Their leader, Dr. Abrams, made perfunctory introductions before establishing their operation in my living room. covering my walls with maps, targeting the precise territories the creatures had marked as forbidden. "We're conducting comprehensive environmental assessment," Abrams explained, though his equipment suggested audio analysis and thermal detection rather than soil sampling. "These regions show unusual wildlife avoidance patterns consistent with territorial predator presence." His careful avoidance of specific terminology revealed his true interest. These researchers knew exactly what they were hunting. That evening, reviewing their research permits, I discovered authorization signatures from military branches alongside academic institutions, a connection that sent warning signals through my experience with classified information. This wasn't environmental research, but a sanctioned investigation of the creatures. As the researchers discussed expedition plans, I realized their approach would violate every territorial boundary established in recent weeks. They planned to deploy audio recording stations directly in forbidden zones, using calls recorded from similar investigations in Washington state. "We've had success drawing subjects into observation range using territorial challenge vocalizations," one researcher explained, demonstrating deep, resonant calls designed to provoke response. I recognized the dangerous game they were playing. "These zones have shown consistent wildlife incidents," I warned, careful to maintain official terminology. "Safety protocols recommend avoiding areas with recurring territorial behaviors." Dr. Abrams dismissed my concerns with academic confidence. "Our team has extensive experience with North American wildlife. Our methods are designed to minimize risk while maximizing data collection." That night, something massive circled the cabin repeatedly, responding to recorded calls the researchers had tested. The creatures had heard the challenges and were assessing this new development with increasing agitation. Morning revealed fresh evidence of nighttime visitors, massive footprints surrounding the cabin and complex arrangements of broken branches on the porch. The researchers documented everything with barely contained excitement, interpreting territorial warnings as research opportunity. "Classic response patterns," Abrams noted, photographing the markings. "Subject is establishing dominance display while assessing potential threats." When they departed for their first expedition, I followed at a distance, observing as they deliberately crossed boundaries and placed equipment in zones marked forbidden in the territorial map left for me. They activated audio systems broadcasting challenge calls into the forest, essentially shouting provocations into territories the creatures considered inviolate. The forest's response was immediate. Birds fell silent, small animals fled the area, and the atmosphere itself seemed to thicken with tension. Through binoculars, I observed shadows moving parallel to the research team, massive figures using terrain with skilled concealment despite their size. The creatures were coordinating, communicating, assessing, but not yet engaging. That evening, researchers returned with preliminary data showing multiple thermal signatures of enormous bipedal figures observing their expedition from concealment. Audio recordings captured complex vocalizations exchanged between at least 7 individuals. "Tomorrow we push farther in," Abrams announced. "The subjects show remarkable restraint compared to documented encounters in other regions. We need to understand what variables are different here." I recognize the dangerous escalation path. These are territorial displays by potentially dangerous wildlife. Protocol recommends withdrawal when such clear warnings are observed. My concerns were noted, but dismissed. Research authorization trumped standard procedures. That night, the forest around the cabin erupted with activity. Massive shadows moving openly between trees, vocalizations echoing across the lake, territorial displays increasing in intensity. The researchers recorded everything, interpreting the escalation as research success rather than danger signs. Near dawn, something heavy landed on the cabin roof, deliberate footsteps moving across wooden shingles, pausing above rooms where researchers slept. A warning impossible to misinterpret. The research team's second expedition penetrated deeper into forbidden zones, carrying sedation equipment and capture preparations alongside scientific instruments. I followed officially now, designated as safety escort, watching as they systematically violated territorial boundaries established over previous weeks. We found the first research station demolished mid-afternoon. equipment destroyed with precise efficiency rather than animal rage. Audio devices had been carefully disassembled rather than smashed, components arranged in patterns suggesting deliberate communication. Abrams interpreted this as research gold rather than final warning. Tool use and symbolic communication confirmed. This exceeds any previously documented interaction. As daylight faded, we discovered an arranged display blocking our return path. Deer carcasses placed precisely across the trail, heads oriented toward our position, front legs crossed in a pattern resembling Denaina symbols for danger. The researchers documented this while missing its significance. I recognized the arrangement from my grandmother's teachings, not just warning, but declaration of intent. The territorial negotiation had ended. Something else was beginning. As darkness descended, sounds of movement surrounded our position, not concealed now, but deliberate, coordinated. Massive figures briefly visible between trees, circling our position with strategic purpose. Researchers activated powerful lights that revealed nothing yet, somehow amplified the sense of watchful presence beyond their reach. We should withdraw immediately, I advised, recognizing the tactical positioning around us. They're establishing containment formation. Abrams overruled me, ordering equipment deployment for nocturnal observation. This is unprecedented contact opportunity. We're witnessing direct response to human presence. What happened next occurred with such speed that recording devices barely captured it. Massive figures emerged simultaneously from multiple directions, not charging, but advancing with coordinated precision. As researchers activated tranquilizer weapons, the creatures demonstrated their true capabilities, moving with impossible speed for their size. They didn't attack, they extracted. 3 researchers were simply gone in moments, equipment scattered where they had stood. No violence, just overwhelming physical superiority executed with strategic clarity. Abrams and I found ourselves facing the largest creature, 9 feet of muscled presence, its breathing deep and controlled as it stood just beyond the light's edge. Recognition flashed as its eyes found mine, a moment of evaluation passing between us before it melted back into darkness, leaving us unharmed but unmistakably dismissed. "They took them," Abrams whispered, scientific detachment shattered by witnessing capabilities beyond his research parameters. "They just selected targets and extracted them. The creatures allowed us to retreat, maintaining parallel movement through the forest, escorting our withdrawal to territorial boundaries. We reached the cabin near dawn to find the 3 missing researchers seated calmly on the porch, physically unharmed but profoundly silent, their equipment, notes, and recording devices gone. When finally persuaded to speak, they described being carried at incredible speed through forests, blindfolded with organic materials, and held briefly in locations they couldn't identify, before being returned with a message delivered through arranged objects. "They placed our compass pointing toward the road," one researcher explained, voice steady but eyes haunted. "Then they arranged our bootlaces to spell go." The research expedition ended that morning. As university vehicles departed, Morris arrived with additional rangers, establishing perimeter security while debriefing me privately. "They could have killed everyone," he noted, reviewing my report. "Instead, they demonstrated capacity and restraint, made their point about boundaries without bloodshed." "They're communicating more directly than ever before," I observed, evolving their approach to human interaction. Morris considered this with grave expression. "The question is, why now? What's changed in their decision-making? They've maintained separation for generations." As he departed, Morris left me with unauthorized information, satellite imagery showing unprecedented movement patterns among the creatures across multiple regions, suggesting coordination between previously isolated groups. "Something bigger is happening," he confided. "They're responding to changes across their entire territory. Your location seems to be a focal point for whatever they're communicating." That night, alone again in my cabin, I felt the weighted presence of watching eyes. Not threatening now, but evaluating, considering. At midnight, heavy footsteps crossed my porch deliberately. I opened the door to find a complex arrangement of objects, My own trail maps altered with precise markings showing expanded forbidden zones and new boundaries drawn with unmistakable clarity. Among the maps lay a stone carved with Dena'ina symbols, ancient language spelling out concepts my grandmother had taught me: boundary, respect, messenger. They had identified my role. Not just ranger, not researcher, not threat. Intermediary between worlds that were threatening to collide. The satellite phone call came at 2:18 a.m., 3 days after the researchers departed. Morris's voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "We've got increased activity across all monitored regions," he reported without preamble. "Groups moving with coordination between territories. Something's triggered response patterns beyond anything in our records." Before I could respond, he continued, "Washington's sending a specialized team. Military background, scientific oversight. They're calling it containment assessment." The implications chilled me. After decades maintaining distance, authorities were considering direct intervention. "When?" I asked. "Helicopter arrives tomorrow. Your designated regional expert and guide." Dawn revealed why the creatures had been establishing new territorial markings. Dozens of complex structures had appeared overnight along the lakeshore. Not random arrangements, but sophisticated communications. Stick figures depicting human forms alongside representations of the creatures themselves. Maps drawn in disturbed earth, showing human settlements as dark zones spreading across traditionally forbidden territories. They were communicating concerns about encroachment, telling their side of a story generations in development. The military assessment team arrived midday, 4 operatives in civilian clothing carrying equipment in unmarked cases, led by Commander Wilson, a woman whose precise movements suggested extensive field experience. Their helicopter departed immediately after unloading supplies clearly beyond standard assessment needs. "We understand you've had direct observation opportunities," Wilson stated during brief introductions. "Your guidance will be essential to our assessment parameters." Their operation established in my cabin with disturbing efficiency, communications equipment, monitoring systems, and weapon cases arranged in tactical configuration. Operational maps targeted the precise territories where the creatures had been most active, with markers indicating subject containment zones. Our mission objectives include threat assessment, territorial mapping, and containment strategy development, Wilson explained professionally. Recent incidents suggest changing behavioral patterns requiring updated response protocols. Translation: the creatures' increased visibility had triggered higher-level decisions about their management. As equipment deployments began, I provided required briefings on recent encounters while recognizing the dangerous path unfolding. These operatives viewed the creatures as wildlife management problems, rather than intelligent beings establishing communication. "These territorial markers show sophisticated communication intent," I emphasized, presenting documentation of patterns established over weeks. "They're demonstrating boundaries rather than aggression." Wilson reviewed my evidence with professional detachment. "Interesting behavioral adaptations. Similar patterns observed in multiple regions suggest coordinated response to human activity." That evening, the assessment team deployed preliminary monitoring equipment around the cabin, motion sensors, thermal detection systems, and surveillance cameras, creating a security perimeter. Their preparations carried implicit expectation of confrontation rather than observation. After midnight, the sensors triggered simultaneously, all directions, all quadrants, impossible for individual creatures to activate in coordinated sequence. Wilson's team mobilized with practiced efficiency, activating powerful lights that illuminated nothing despite sensors indicating massive presence just beyond visual range. "They're testing our detection capabilities," Wilson observed with professional admiration. "Coordinated assessment of our technology." By dawn, every sensor had been systematically triggered without visual confirmation of presence. The creatures had mapped our security perimeter with precise methodology, demonstrating intelligence that should have prompted reassessment of the military approach. The assessment team's first expedition departed at first light. Wilson, 2 operatives, and myself navigating toward territories marked with highest activity concentrations. Their equipment included sound suppression technology, thermal imaging, and communication systems beyond standard military issue. We found the first territorial markers 3 miles from the cabin. Massive trees broken at precise heights, creating boundary lines unmistakable in intent. Beyond these markers, fresh footprints appeared in deliberate patterns, leading us deeper into traditionally forbidden zones. "They're drawing us in," I cautioned, recognizing invitation patterns distinct from previous warnings. "This is different from territorial defense." Wilson acknowledged this assessment while continuing forward, her team maintaining tactical formation. The forest changed as we crossed successive boundary markers. Older growth, untouched by human management, with atmosphere palpably different from normal wilderness. Sound behaved differently here, light filtering through canopy with altered quality. Each territorial threshold increased this environmental distinction. We were being allowed into spaces normally forbidden to human presence. 6 miles in, we discovered the first deliberate communication. Arranged stones, forming Denaina symbols, alongside modern representations of helicopters and human structures. The creatures were demonstrating understanding of our technology, our intentions, our presence beyond their traditional territories. "They're showing knowledge of our operational capabilities," Wilson noted with concern. At noon, we reached coordinates marking the expedition's deepest penetration objective, a valley untouched by human presence according to official records. The assessment team deployed surveillance equipment while I examined disturbed earth patterns, suggesting recent gathering of many creatures in council formation. Deep tracks surrounded the gathering site, dozens of individuals of varying sizes, with distinctive foot morphology suggesting family groupings rather than random congregation. This wasn't just territory, but community land, places where social bonds formed and knowledge transferred between generations. As Wilson's team completed equipment deployment, the forest atmosphere shifted noticeably. Wind ceased, birds fell silent. The quality of light changed as cloud cover materialized despite clear weather reports. They had been waiting for us to reach this precise location. The first vocalization came from the north. Deep, resonant calls, unlike anything in recorded wildlife archives. Responses echoed from multiple directions, creating overlapping communication patterns suggesting language rather than animal signaling. Wilson's team activated defensive formation as massive shadows appeared between distant trees, not hiding now but deliberately revealing presence. 9 distinct figures positioned strategically around our location, standing motionless in observation posture. "Hold position," Wilson ordered her team, weapons ready but not raised. "They're establishing contact parameters." The largest figure separated from the perimeter, advancing with deliberate pace to a position 30 yards distant. Standing fully upright, its presence commanded instinctive respect, not through aggression, but through sheer physical certainty, the absolute belonging of apex existence in primal territory. For several minutes, assessment team and creature regarded each other in silence. Then it made its demonstration. From a pouch-like fold of fur, the creature produced items confirming worst assumptions: military identification tags from operations officially denied, research equipment from classified projects, mechanical components from surveillance devices denied to exist. Decades of covert human observation and intervention laid bare in powerful hands. "They've been collecting evidence," Wilson whispered, professional composure momentarily broken. "They understand exactly who we are and why we're here." The creature placed these items on the ground with deliberate ceremony, before reaching into another fold and producing something that changed the dynamic entirely. A stone tablet covered with Denaina symbols alongside modern English letters, crudely but accurately formed. They had created physical communication, bridging ancient symbolism with contemporary language. Wilson signaled me forward. "You're our language specialist. What does it say?" Approaching the tablet placed deliberately between our species, I recognized symbols my grandmother had shown me in childhood. Concepts relating to boundaries, agreements, warnings. Interspersed between these were English words: witness, remember, speak. They had identified my role as translator between worlds. The tablet continued with maps showing territories traditionally separated overlaid with warning symbols near human expansion areas. The message combined ancient territorial claims with recognition of changing circumstances, not rejection of human presence, but insistence on mutual boundaries. "They're proposing terms," I explained to Wilson. "Boundaries they'll respect if we respect theirs. Areas forbidden to both sides to maintain separation." Wilson processed this information with tactical assessment. "You're suggesting intelligent negotiation rather than animal territoriality." "I'm suggesting they've been allowing us to believe they're wildlife when they're something else entirely." As darkness approached, the creatures maintained their observation perimeter, while we established camp within their permitted zone, an unprecedented development in documented encounters. Throughout the night, they remained visible at the perimeter, watching our team while we watched them, species assessing species across evolutionary distance. Near dawn, the largest creature approached again, depositing another communication tablet before retreating. This tablet held images of helicopters crossed out, weapons marked with prohibition symbols, clear terms regarding militarized presence in their territory. "They're drawing lines regarding acceptable human activities," I translated for Wilson, whose tactical assessment was evolving visibly with each demonstration of intelligence. "Washington needs this information immediately," she decided, activating secure communication protocols. "This changes assessment parameters completely." The response from authorities came within hours: expanded operational directives, additional personnel deployment, escalated research priorities. The creature's demonstration of intelligence had triggered exactly the increased attention they appeared to be warning against. As we prepared to return to the cabin, the creatures performed one final communication demonstration, dozens appearing simultaneously along our path, creating a living corridor through which we were permitted to travel. Not threatening, but establishing unambiguous demonstration of their territorial control and population strength. Upon reaching the cabin, we found it surrounded by massive footprints and complex arrangements depicting helicopters, humans, and creatures in various positions of proximity and separation, illustrated terms for future interaction. The assessment team's remaining members had documented similar demonstrations around the property. The creatures had made synchronized contact at multiple locations during our expedition, establishing comprehensive communication with all human representatives in their territory. That evening, as Wilson coordinated expanded operations with authorities, I examined the tablet brought from the encounter site. Beyond the translated components, I recognized symbols my grandmother had taught me, concepts more complex than territorial boundaries, relating to ancient agreements between her people and the forest guardians. One symbol sequence translated roughly as, "The agreements remember even when your kind forgets." I realized then what the creatures were communicating through my specific involvement. They recognized the Dena'ina blood flowing through my veins. They were invoking ancient pacts made with indigenous peoples, agreements predating modern boundaries, recording in generational memory when humans and their kind established mutual respect of separate domains. Near midnight, while assessment team members prepared for expanded operations, I felt the weighted presence of watching eyes beyond my window. Not threatening, but expectant. They had delivered their message to authorities through established channels, but now awaited my personal response as someone carrying blood that remembered older agreements. I stepped outside, feeling multiple presences in surrounding darkness. Following instinct and half-remembered teachings, I arranged stones in patterns my grandmother had shown me, ancient symbols for messenger, witness, and boundary voice. Heavy footsteps approached from the forest edge, deliberate, unafraid. The largest creature emerged into moonlight 30 yards distant, regarding my arranged symbols with visible recognition. For several moments we regarded each other across species boundaries, hereditary messenger facing territorial guardian. It gestured toward the forest behind it, then toward my cabin, then made a separating motion with massive hands, the universal concept of boundaries illustrated through primal communication. I nodded understanding, arranging additional stones showing human figures and creature figures with boundary line between, confirmation of message received. The creature observed my response before producing one final communication, a carved wooden token bearing combined Denaina symbols and English letters spelling "Witness Speaks." They had identified my true purpose here. Not just ranger, not researcher, not military guide. Intermediary between colliding worlds. Translator of boundaries. Voice remembering ancient agreements when modern authorities recognized only management protocols and containment strategies. As the creature retreated into forest darkness, I understood with clarity born of blood memory and awakened purpose. The wilderness had called me here specifically. They had recognized something carried in my lineage, awakened by proximity and circumstance. Inside, Wilson coordinated expanded operations with authorities, planning increased presence in territories the creatures had explicitly marked forbidden. The human response to intelligence demonstration was escalation rather than negotiation. The collision between worlds was accelerating. Ancient boundaries were failing under modern pressure. And I stood at the crossroads, carrying messages between species whose paths were never meant to fully connect, yet could no longer remain fully separate. The wilderness had chosen its messenger. The creatures had recognized their witness. Now I had to decide which boundaries to honor in the coming storm of worlds colliding. The government response arrived with dawn, 3 helicopters delivering equipment, personnel, and operational infrastructure beyond anything previously deployed in this wilderness. Within hours, my remote outpost transformed into forward operating base for what authorities classified as Wildlife Management Contingency Implementation. Commander Wilson's assessment had triggered protocols established decades earlier but never fully activated, containment strategies developed when the creature's existence was officially recognized but publicly denied. 30 personnel established perimeter security, while scientific teams deployed advanced monitoring systems throughout surrounding territories. Morris arrived with senior ranger leadership, his expression grave as we observed military-grade equipment being unloaded. "This is exactly what we've worked decades to prevent," he confided, watching technicians calibrate tracking systems. Direct confrontation rather than managed separation. Operation Director Colonel Hargrove established command center in my living room, walls covered with territorial maps and incident reports dating back 50 years. His briefing revealed the government's long awareness of the creature's existence and intelligence. Subject population has maintained territorial separation through generations of observation, he explained to assembled team leaders. Recent behavioral changes suggest coordinated response to human expansion. Our mission objectives include containment assessment, population documentation, and security protocol implementation. Translation: the creature's increased visibility had triggered decision to establish permanent management rather than traditional separation policy. What authorities didn't understand was why centuries of successful avoidance had suddenly shifted to direct communication. They recognized tactical changes but missed the underlying message. Boundaries failing under pressure required negotiation rather than management. As operation protocols expanded through the day, I provided required briefings while recognizing the dangerous misalignment between government approach and the creature's demonstrated intentions. These authorities viewed communication attempts as behavioral anomalies rather than deliberate outreach. They're establishing contact deliberately, I emphasized during strategy sessions. The territorial displays show sophisticated communication intent rather than aggression. Colonel Hargrove acknowledged my perspective while proceeding with containment strategy. Your cultural insights are valuable, Ranger Kasky. However, operational security requires standardized wildlife management protocols, regardless of potential communication attempts. That night, as expanded security perimeter activated around the base, sensors triggered systematically across all quadrants, identical to previous demonstrations but larger in scale. Dozens of massive figures briefly visible at forest edge before vanishing with impossible coordination, demonstrating presence without aggression. They were mapping our expanded capabilities, counting our numbers, assessing our intentions. By morning, every monitoring device within 2 miles had been systematically examined, with several disabled through precise removal rather than destruction. Trail cameras captured partial images of enormous hands delicately disassembling electronic components with unexpected dexterity. Colonel Hargrove interpreted this as security threat rather than intelligence demonstration. They're neutralizing our observation capabilities, escalate defensive protocols, and expand secondary monitoring systems. The operational escalation continued through the day. Surveillance drones deployed above forest canopy, ground-penetrating radar mapping subterranean features, audio systems, analyzing forest acoustics for vocalization patterns. Government response to potential communication was comprehensive documentation and containment rather than dialogue. Senior researcher Dr. Evans established biological assessment protocols focusing on potential capture opportunities, tranquilizer dosages, physical restraint methods, and transportation requirements for specimen acquisition. These subjects demonstrate physical capabilities and potential intelligence, requiring comprehensive biological assessment, she explained during scientific briefing. Documentation of physiological structures will provide essential data regarding species classification. Translation: they were preparing to capture creatures whose intelligence they simultaneously documented and dismissed. As operations expanded through the day, I observed the forest's response. Birds abandoned traditional territories, smaller mammals migrated from the region, atmosphere itself seeming to thicken with tension. Nature recognized coming confrontation before human instruments could measure it. Late afternoon brought the first direct response from the creatures, not aggressive action, but unmistakable message. Every trail leading from the base was blocked with arranged structures, massive trees positioned with mathematical precision, forming barriers requiring mechanical equipment to remove. They were establishing physical boundaries where communication attempts had been ignored. Colonel Hargrove deployed engineering assets to clear primary access routes while expanding security protocols. Subject population is demonstrating territorial defense behaviors consistent with predator response patterns. Maintain elevated security status and accelerate monitoring deployment. That night, watching military hardware illuminated by floodlights, I recognized the fundamental disconnection between worlds now colliding. Authorities responded to intelligence with management protocols, while the creatures responded to encroachment with escalating boundary enforcement. The consequences seemed increasingly predictable. Near midnight, the forest fell unnaturally silent. Not just absence of wildlife sounds, but dampening of mechanical noise from base operations. Monitoring systems recorded temperature drops, atmospheric pressure changes, and electromagnetic anomalies extending outward from the restricted valley. They were demonstrating environmental influence beyond physical presence. Colonel Hargrove ordered immediate deployment of elite assessment teams, 3 units of 4 personnel each, directing expedition toward restricted valley, despite territorial warnings. I was assigned advisory position with primary team despite my documented concerns regarding boundary violations. Your experience with subject behavior patterns is essential to assessment parameters, Hargrove stated, overriding my objections. This operation proceeds with or without your cooperation. As teams prepared for pre-dawn departure, Morris pulled me aside with unofficial warning. They've never seen what happens when the boundaries are deliberately breached, he confided. Previous administrations maintained separation protocols because they understood the consequences of direct confrontation. These creatures have been communicating increasingly specific terms, I noted. Why risk provocation now? Morris's expression darkened. Because some authorities believe managing a known threat is preferable to unknown potential. They want controlled confrontation on their terms, rather than waiting for creatures to dictate engagement parameters. As darkness deepened before departure, I felt the weighted presence of watching eyes beyond security perimeter. Not threatening, but evaluating, considering. Heavy footsteps approached my cabin door, deliberate, unmistakable. Security personnel raised weapons as something massive moved in darkness beyond floodlight perimeter. The largest creature emerged partially into illuminated boundary, 9 feet of primal presence, regarding assembled military hardware with visible intelligence. For several moments it observed our preparations, assessment flowing between species across security boundaries. Then it deliberately placed an object at perimeter edge before retreating into forest darkness. Final communication before paths irrevocably diverged. The object was another carved tablet combining Denaina symbols with English letters, concepts relating to consequences of boundary violation alongside warning symbols. The message concluded with a single English word: choose. They were offering final opportunity to respect territorial boundaries before implementing consequences. Colonel Hargrove reviewed this evidence with tactical assessment rather than communication recognition. Subject is demonstrating territorial warning behaviors consistent with apex predator patterns. Proceed with planned assessment expedition using elevated security protocols. As pre-dawn preparations concluded, I made final attempt to redirect operational approach. These aren't just territorial warnings, but specific communication regarding boundaries they expect respected. The consequences of violation may exceed our containment capabilities. Hargrove acknowledged my concern while proceeding with operational timeline. Your cultural perspective is noted, Ranger Casquet. However, national security priorities require direct assessment rather than territorial accommodation. The primary expedition departed at first light. Colonel Hargrove, 8 security personnel, 2 researchers, and myself navigating toward restricted valley across boundaries the creatures had explicitly marked forbidden. Advanced equipment monitored environmental conditions as we crossed successive territorial markers into increasingly primeval forest. 6 miles from base, we discovered the first unmistakable warning: trail blocked by arranged animal carcasses, displaying precise anatomical dissection beyond natural predation. Each specimen had been positioned in anatomical demonstration posture, internal structures exposed with surgical precision. They're showing knowledge of biology, Dr. Evans noted with professional fascination, demonstrating understanding of physiological vulnerabilities. Translation: the creatures were illustrating precisely what they could do to human anatomy if provoked. Colonel Hargrove ordered continued advancement with elevated security posture. His team navigated around the warning display while documenting its components for base analysis. The forest changed noticeably as we penetrated deeper, older growth, untouched by human management, with atmosphere altering perceptibly at each territorial threshold. Sound behaved differently here, light filtering with altered quality, air itself carrying scents unmapped in biological classification. We were entering spaces where human presence had never been permitted. 10 miles in, monitoring equipment detected massive thermal signatures surrounding our position. Dozens of creatures moving parallel to our course with coordinated precision. Not hiding their presence, but establishing containment perimeter around our expedition. They're hurting us, I observed, as path options narrowed through strategic placement of warning markers, directing our movement toward specific coordinates. Colonel Hargrove recognized tactical manipulation, but continued advancement. Maintain formation and proceed to primary assessment coordinates. Subject behavioral patterns suggest territorial display rather than immediate threat response. Near mid-afternoon, we reached the coordinates marking expedition's deepest penetration objective, a clearing within the restricted valley, untouched by human presence according to official records. The assessment team deployed monitoring equipment, while security personnel established defensive perimeter. The forest response was immediate, deep, resonant vocalizations echoing from multiple directions, creating overlapping communication patterns suggesting language rather than animal signaling. Monitoring equipment recorded dozens of thermal signatures, establishing strategic positions around our location. They had been waiting for us to reach this precise location. The first creatures appeared simultaneously from multiple directions, massive figures emerging between trees with coordinated precision. Not charging, but advancing methodically, establishing visual presence while maintaining tactical positioning. Within moments, our expedition stood surrounded by dozens of creatures demonstrating clear coordination and strategic awareness. Colonel Hargrove ordered defensive formation as the largest creature separated from the perimeter. Standing fully upright, its presence commanded instinctive respect, not through aggression but through evolutionary certainty, the absolute belonging of apex existence in primal territory. For several moments, expedition members and creature regarded each other in silence. Then it made its demonstration. The creature produced objects confirming worst assumptions: military identification from disappeared personnel, research equipment from classified operations, personal effects from civilians officially listed as missing rather than potential contact incidents. Decades of concealed encounters laid bare in powerful hands. Before Colonel Hargrove could respond, the creature made its final communication demonstration, producing another carved tablet with combined symbolism and recognizable English. The message required no translation with its unmistakable clarity: leave or stay forever. The terms had been delivered, the boundary established, the consequences clarified. Colonel Hargrove activated emergency protocols, ordering immediate withdrawal toward base perimeter. His tactical assessment had evolved visibly, with direct observation of coordinated intelligence and clear numeric superiority. The creatures allowed our retreat, maintaining parallel movement through forest, escorting our withdrawal to specific territorial boundary before stopping in unified demonstration of territorial limit. Upon reaching the cabin, we discovered base operations in controlled chaos, monitoring systems reporting simultaneous creature activity across all regional territories, showing coordinated movement patterns, suggesting organized response to military presence. They're mobilizing in reaction to our expanded operational footprint, senior analyst reported, displaying thermal mapping showing dozens of creatures establishing strategic positions around human presence throughout the region. Colonel Hargrove initiated immediate security assessment with regional command, reporting intelligence demonstration beyond operational parameters. Within hours, orders arrived from highest authorities: immediate operational withdrawal and restoration of traditional separation protocols. Translation: the creatures had demonstrated sufficient organized capability to trigger government reassessment of direct confrontation policy. As military hardware returned to helicopters and operational presence reversed its expansion, Morris confirmed the shifted protocol direction. Administration has reconsidered interaction approach based on your expedition reports, he explained privately. Traditional boundary maintenance protocols will be reinstated with enhanced cultural consideration elements. Translation: the government had recognized that managing separation was preferable to risking direct confrontation with intelligence, demonstrating organized resistance capability. As base operations dismantled through the day, the forest response was immediate. Territorial markers shifted from warning displays to boundary confirmation symbols. The creatures were acknowledging negotiated withdrawal with their own reciprocal disengagement. By evening, as final personnel departed, leaving only standard ranger presence, I observed the forest returning toward natural rhythms, birds gradually reoccupying territories, atmospheric tension dissipating, primeval weight lifting from immediate consciousness. The collision of worlds had been momentarily averted through mutual recognition of boundaries. That night, alone again in my cabin beside Mirror Lake, I felt the weighted presence of watching eyes beyond my window. Not threatening now, but evaluating, considering. Heavy footsteps approached deliberately across my porch. Following instinct and awakened understanding, I opened the door to find another carved token placed precisely where I would find it. Denaina symbols alongside English letters spelling "Boundary Voice Remains." They had confirmed my role in territories now requiring ongoing translation between species whose paths were never meant to fully connect, yet could no longer remain fully separate. I arranged stones in patterns my grandmother had taught me, ancient symbols for messenger, witness, and boundary respect. From the forest edge came acknowledging response, deep vocalization carrying across the lake, not threatening but confirming communication established. Standing between worlds now in official capacity, I recognized the true nature of Outpost 17's purpose, not just monitoring wilderness or protecting visitors, but maintaining ancient separation protocols between colliding domains. The wilderness had called me here for reasons now fully apparent. The creatures had recognized blood-carrying memory of older agreements. Authorities had acknowledged need for cultural intermediary between scientific management and territorial intelligence. As darkness deepened around my cabin, I felt the weight of generations watching from forest shadows, ancestors who had established first boundaries, and creatures who had honored them through centuries. The responsibility of maintaining their separation now rested in hands carrying blood that remembered why boundaries existed. Beyond my window, something moved at forest edge, massive shadow briefly visible in moonlight before melting into primeval darkness, not threatening but acknowledging, confirming mutual recognition across species boundaries. I had come to Alaska seeking connection with heritage, finding purpose in wilderness guardianship. What I hadn't understood was that the wilderness itself had been waiting for someone carrying ancient memory in modern form, boundary voice when worlds threatened collision. Now, as multiple presences moved through darkness surrounding my cabin, I understood with clarity, born of blood, awakening, and inherited purpose. The boundaries between worlds were neither solid nor permanent, but requiring constant maintenance through mutual recognition. The wilderness had chosen its guardian. The creatures had recognized their interpreter, and I had found my true purpose, not just ranger, but boundary keeper between worlds whose separation preserved both from consequences of collision. Outside my window, ancient eyes watched from primeval shadows, patient, intelligent, territorial, waiting to see what kind of guardian I would become in this borderland between worlds. I never wanted to be a truck driver. That's the thing about life. It rarely consults your desires before charting your course. 15 years behind the wheel of various rigs, and I still sometimes wake up wondering how I got here. The constant hum of tires against asphalt has become more familiar than silence. April 15th started like most days. I was holed up in a roadside motel outside Fresno, the kind with cigarette burns on the nightstand and water stains mapping the ceiling. The digital clock flashed 3:17 a.m. when my phone buzzed against the laminate surface. Dispatch never calls at decent hours. Yeah? My voice was thick with interrupted sleep. Mitch, we've got a last-minute haul. Sandra's voice, our night dispatcher, sounded tired too. Need you to pick up a load in Barstow by noon. Deliver to Kalinga warehouse. Paperwork's being emailed. Kalinga? Never heard of it. Small place northeast of Bakersfield. Real quiet. Pays good though, hazard bonus. That got my attention. Hazard for what? Just the timeline and remote destination. Warehouse is pretty isolated. She paused. Look, I know you're maxed out on hours this month, but we're short-handed. Double rate. Double rate meant I could chip away at the mountain of debt that grew taller every month. Alimony to Cheryl, child support for a daughter who barely remembered me, and credit cards that kept me afloat between paychecks. Send the details. I'll hit the road by 4. The motel shower sputtered lukewarm water as I tried to wash away exhaustion. The bathroom mirror revealed a face weathered by years on the road. Deep lines around my eyes, stubble more gray than brown, permanent dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes. 42 years old and looking 50. By 4:30, I was on I-5 heading south in a 2012 Peterbilt that had seen better days. The cab smelled perpetually of beef jerky and stale coffee, but it was more home than the apartment I rarely visited in Sacramento. The morning passed in a blur of highway miles and forgettable truck stops. Barstow arrived in a haze of desert heat. The loading dock crew was efficient, 4 pallets of unmarked crates, sealed with warning labels indicating fragile laboratory equipment. Nothing unusual, though the foreman seemed nervous, checking his watch repeatedly. Need to make good time to Kalinga, he muttered, signing off on my manifest. They're expecting this by sundown. What's the rush on lab equipment? He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. Above my pay grade. Just know they're paying premium for speed. I've hauled enough loads to know when something feels off. This wasn't quite wrong, but it wasn't quite right either. Still, double rate meant I could skip next month's round of explaining to Cheryl why the check might be late. The GPS estimated 5 hours to Kalinga. As I pulled away from Barstow, I noticed another detail. The manifest listed the delivery address simply as Warehouse 17, Access Road B, Kalinga, California. No company name, no receiving contact, just a location. The route took me through increasingly empty stretches of California, the kind of places where cities give way to towns, towns thin out to outposts, and eventually the radio picks up nothing but static. Cell service bars disappeared one by one as the road narrowed. By late afternoon, I was navigating county roads that barely qualified for the name. The Peterbilt suspension protested each pothole and uneven patch. The landscape had transformed into rolling, barren hills, occasionally interrupted by clusters of wind-twisted trees. No houses, no gas stations, no signs of life beyond the occasional hawk circling overhead. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. Shadows lengthened across the road, reaching like dark fingers from the roadside brush. I switched on the headlights even though there was still adequate daylight. Something about the encroaching darkness felt premature, eager. According to the GPS, Kalinga was 40 miles ahead when the first real sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't anything tangible, just a gradual awareness that I hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. The two-lane road stretched ahead, vanishing into the distance where hills rose like a barrier against the dying light. I reached for the CB radio, tuning through channels, hoping to catch some chatter from other truckers. Nothing but static. My phone showed no service, which wasn't surprising given the remote location, but somehow made the isolation more profound. As darkness fully claimed the landscape, the headlights carved a tunnel through the black. The familiar comfort of driving transformed into something more vigilant, more primitive. Each curve in the road revealed only more emptiness, and the strange sensation of being watched intensified, though there was clearly no one around for miles. The dashboard clock read 11:43 p.m. when the GPS announced I was 10 miles from my destination. My eyes burned from fatigue, hands cramped around the wheel. The radio, which had been tuned to static for company, suddenly crackled to life with a burst of garbled speech. I adjusted the dial, trying to clear the signal. Repeat. Avoid Route 27 near Kalinga. Accident reported at mile marker 142. Emergency vehicles on scene. The transmission cut off abruptly, returning to static. I checked my route. I was on Route 27, approaching mile marker 140. Slowing the rig, I strained to see ahead, watching for flashing lights or any sign of the reported accident. Nothing appeared in the darkness, just the endless ribbon of road. With added caution, I continued forward. 2 miles later, the headlights illuminated mile marker 142, but there was no accident, no emergency vehicles, nothing but the empty road and the night. A chill ran down my back despite the warm cab. Why would someone report an accident where there wasn't one? The answer came 3 minutes later, as my headlights swept across something on the roadside ahead, the unmistakable outline of a boxy vehicle, hazard lights blinking weakly in the dark. As I drew closer, I recognized it as a medium-sized delivery truck, angled awkwardly half off the road. Against the persistent warning in my gut, I slowed the Peterbilt and pulled over about 50 yards ahead. Through the side mirror, I watched the hazard lights pulse in hypnotic rhythm. No movement, no signs of anyone around the vehicle. I sat there, engine idling, debating with myself. Every instinct told me to drive on, make the delivery, get paid, go home. But 15 years of road courtesy and basic human decency wouldn't let me leave without checking. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? My hand hesitated on the door handle. Beyond the windshield, the night seemed to press against the glass, watching, waiting. I flipped on my own hazards, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the darkness. The night air hit me like a physical presence, unusually still and heavy with something I couldn't identify. Not humidity, not heat, but a thickness that seemed to resist movement. The distant hills were black silhouettes against a sky scattered with stars, their light seeming impossibly distant. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness as I walked back toward the abandoned truck. The only sounds were my boots on the asphalt and the soft tick of the Peterbilt's cooling engine. No wildlife calls, no rustling brush, no passing cars, just complete silence that amplified every noise I made. As I approached the vehicle, details emerged from the shadows. It was an older model Mitsubishi box truck, white paint faded and peeling in places. The driver's side door hung partially open. Deep scratches ran along the passenger side, as though someone had taken a metal tool to it with deliberate force. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Anyone here? Need help?" No response came except the echo of my own words, fading into nothing. The hazard lights continued their rhythmic blinking, casting alternating red glows across the pavement. I approached cautiously, sweeping my flashlight around the perimeter of the vehicle. No signs of accident damage. No crumpled metal, no broken glass. The truck appeared to have simply been pulled over and abandoned. My light caught something near the rear tires, dark droplets leading toward the back of the truck. I followed them slowly, tension building in my shoulders with each step. The trail led to the roll-up door of the cargo area, which was shut but not locked, its latch hanging loose. Against my better judgment, I gripped the handle and pulled upward. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a metallic groan that sent goosebumps racing across my skin. My flashlight beam revealed a cargo space about half filled with cardboard boxes. Standard shipping packages, nothing remarkable, except for the dark smears across several of them. The metallic scent hit me immediately, unmistakable and primal. Blood. I stepped back quickly, heart rate accelerating. This wasn't a minor injury or nosebleed. The amount suggested something far worse. I scanned the area again, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was standing alone on this deserted road. The driver's compartment might hold answers, or at least identification. Moving to the open door, I shined my light inside. The seat was empty, keys still dangling from the ignition. A clipboard with delivery papers sat on the passenger seat, partially covered by what appeared to be a denim jacket. I leaned in cautiously, reaching for the clipboard. The interior smelled of blood and something else. A sour, acrid odor I couldn't place. My fingers had just touched the paper when I noticed the state of the steering wheel. Covered in dark, partially dried blood, with clear handprints where someone had gripped it. The logical response would have been to retreat immediately, call for help, wait safely in my own vehicle. Instead, curiosity and concern propelled me to glance at the delivery manifest. The paperwork was for a shipment from a company called Meridian Biosystems to a facility in Kalinga, the same town where I was headed. The coincidence raised the hairs on my neck. I reached for my phone, forgetting momentarily that there was no service. Still, I pulled it out, desperately hoping for even a single bar. The screen reflected back at me, mockingly empty of signal. That's when I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound from somewhere in the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, scanning the surroundings with the light beam. Nothing visible, but the sound came again. The unmistakable scuff of footsteps on pavement, slow and uneven, as though whoever was making them was injured or impaired. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need medical help?" The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched for 10 long seconds before a voice responded from the darkness, so hoarse and strained it barely sounded human. "Help. Me." I directed my light toward the sound, but it revealed only empty road and the scrubby vegetation beyond. Whoever had spoken was staying just beyond the beam's reach. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" I took a cautious step toward the voice, keeping the flashlight extended. "Accident. Please." Something about the voice sent warning signals through my brain, the odd cadence, the forced quality of the words. But the possibility that this was the truck's driver, injured and needing assistance, compelled me forward. I advanced slowly, sweeping the light from side to side. "I'll help you, but I need to see you. Step into the light." The shuffling resumed, coming closer. My flashlight finally caught movement at the edge of its range, a tall figure emerging from behind a clump of desert brush about 30 feet away. Male, broad-shouldered, dressed in what appeared to be dark pants and a light-colored shirt, stained with darker patches. As he moved into better visibility, I felt my stomach tighten. His gait was wrong, jerky and uncoordinated, like someone with severe muscle damage or neurological problems. His head hung at an awkward angle, face still shadowed despite the light directed at him. "Are you the driver?" I asked, taking an involuntary step back. "What happened to you?" He continued forward without answering, each step bringing him closer. When he was about 15 feet away, he raised his head, and the flashlight illuminated his features. My breath caught in my throat. His face was gaunt, almost skeletal, skin stretched tight across the bones, but it was his eyes that froze me in place. Bloodshot to the point of appearing completely red, with pupils so dilated they consumed the iris. Dark fluid, blood, had dried in trails from his nose and the corners of his mouth. Most disturbing was his expression, vacant yet somehow intensely focused, like a predator locked on prey. There was no pain there, no fear, none of the emotions you'd expect from someone involved in an accident, just hunger and his hands, both covered in wet, fresh blood up to the wrists. Self-preservation finally kicked in. I backed away rapidly toward my truck, keeping the light trained on him. "Stay there. Don't come any closer. I'll radio for help." A sound emerged from his throat, not words, but a guttural, rattling groan that raised every primitive alarm in my body. Then he lurched forward with shocking speed, closing half the distance between us in seconds. I turned and ran, abandoning any pretense of helping. The flashlight beam bounced wildly across the landscape as I sprinted toward the Peterbilt, my breathing harsh and panicked. Behind me, I could hear him following, not running, but moving with that same unnatural rapid shuffle. 50 yards to safety, 40, 30. I risked a glance back. He was gaining, moving faster than seemed possible given his jerky gait. His mouth hung open, revealing teeth stained dark in the flashlight's glare. 20 yards, 10. My hand fumbled for the door handle, finally connecting as I heard him close behind me. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, spinning to slam it shut. He was there, one bloody hand gripping the edge of the door, preventing me from closing it. Up close, his skin had an unhealthy gray pallor, and veins stood out black against his temples and neck. That rattling groan emerged again as he leaned his weight against the door. Panic surged through me. I braced my foot against the doorframe and pulled with everything I had, simultaneously reaching for anything to use as a weapon. My hand found the heavy metal thermos I kept in the side compartment. With a desperate heave, I created enough space to swing the thermos directly into his face. It connected with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, blood spurting from his now broken nose, but his expression didn't change. No pain, no surprise, just that same hungry focus. The moment of reprieve was enough. I slammed the door and locked it, then lunged for the ignition. The engine roared to life as the man recovered and threw himself against the driver's side window, smearing blood across the glass. His face pressed against it, mouth working silently, eyes fixed on me with terrible intent. I slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator. The Peterbilt lurched forward, tires spinning briefly before catching traction. The man's hands slid across the window as the truck pulled away, leaving crimson streaks in their wake. In the side mirror, I watched him standing in the middle of the road, staring after me. He made no attempt to chase the truck, perhaps knowing the futility. But neither did he wander away. He just stood there, a solitary figure in my taillights, watching until distance and darkness swallowed him from view. My hand shook violently on the steering wheel as I pushed the truck well beyond safe speeds on the narrow road. After several miles, rational thought began to return, and I eased off the accelerator, trying to process what had just happened. The man had been injured, certainly. The blood evidence was clear. But his behavior suggested something far worse than physical trauma. His movements, his vacant yet predatory gaze, his apparent immunity to pain. It reminded me of footage I'd seen of people in the grip of extreme drug psychosis. But even that explanation felt insufficient for what I'd witnessed. Whatever affected him seemed to have erased his humanity, leaving something primal and dangerous in its place. I glanced down at my trembling hands, noticing for the first time the smears of blood on my right palm and wrist, transferred from the door where he had grabbed it. I wiped it frantically on my jeans, suddenly terrified of contact with the substance. The GPS indicated I was now just 15 miles from Kalinga. Against all logic, I was still heading toward my destination rather than away from whatever horror I'd encountered. But with no cell service and miles of empty road behind me, moving forward seemed the only option. As the adrenaline began to subside, questions crowded my mind. Who was that man? What had happened to him in the truck he presumably drove? And most disturbing, was his condition related to the cargo he was transporting to the same destination where I was headed? The coincidence was too strong to ignore. both of us hauling deliveries to an obscure location like Kalinga, his truck containing medical or biological shipments, according to the manifest I'd glimpsed. It suggested connections I wasn't sure I wanted to unravel. Ahead, the first signs of civilization appeared, a solitary streetlight marking an intersection. Beyond it, scattered lights indicated the outskirts of what must be Kalinga. The dashboard clock showed 12:38 a.m. I'd made it to my destination, but the relief I should have felt was absent. Instead, as the small town emerged from the darkness, a deep certainty settled in my gut that whatever waited for me there would provide no sanctuary. The horror I'd encountered on the road wasn't behind me. I was driving straight toward its source. Kalinga wasn't much of a town, more like someone's half-hearted attempt at creating one. A main street with maybe 15 buildings, most dark at this hour. A gas station with its fluorescent lights creating a harsh island of illumination. 2 traffic lights, both blinking yellow. Population sign at the town limits claimed 827 residents, though I wondered how recently that had been updated. The gas station was my immediate target, not for fuel, but for human contact and the possibility of reporting what I'd encountered on the road. As I pulled the massive rig into the forecourt, the young attendant inside looked up with obvious surprise. They probably didn't get many semi-trucks at this hour. The station's lighting made everything appear sickly and artificial as I stepped down from the cab. My legs felt unsteady, partly from hours of driving, partly from lingering shock. The dried blood on my hand had crusted into a rusty brown stain that I tried to hide by shoving my hand into my pocket. The bell above the door jingled as I entered. The cashier, a young man with a patchy beard and tired eyes, straightened up behind the counter. "Didn't expect to see a rig like that tonight," he said, eyeing me curiously. "You lost?" "No, making a delivery to a warehouse outside town." I tried to sound casual, though my voice came out rougher than intended. "Is there a police station in Kalinga?" His expression shifted, wariness replacing curiosity. "Sheriff's office. Closed now, though. Deputy Wilson makes rounds every couple hours." He paused. "You in some kind of trouble?" "I saw something on the road about 30 miles back." I hesitated, unsure how to describe the encounter without sounding deranged. "Abandoned delivery truck. Driver was injured, acting strange, attacked me when I tried to help." The cashier's face drained of color. "What kind of truck?" The question seemed oddly specific. "Medium-sized box truck. White Mitsubishi. You know something about it?" He glanced toward the window, then back at me, voice dropping. "That's the 3rd report this week. Truck showing up in different spots outside town. Sheriff says it's just drifters or drug addicts passing through, nothing to worry about." "3rd report of what exactly?" He fidgeted with a stack of receipts. "People acting weird, violent. 2 nights ago, some guy came in covered in blood, not saying anything, just staring. Tried to grab Mrs. Winters when she was paying for gas. Ran off when I called the sheriff." A chill settled in my stomach. "And nobody's investigating?" "Sheriff Graves says he is." The skepticism in his tone was clear. "But since that new facility opened outside town, things have been different. Sheriff spends a lot of time out there now." "What facility?" "Research place, Meridian something. Popped up about 6 months ago in the old industrial zone. Brought in their own people, don't mix with locals much." He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "They're the ones getting all these deliveries at weird hours." Meridian, the same company name I'd seen on the abandoned trucks manifest, and now my own delivery, likely heading to the same location. "This warehouse I'm delivering to, Warehouse 17 on Access Road B, that part of this facility?" The cashier's eyes widened slightly. "That's the place. Look, man, make your delivery and get out of town. Whatever they're doing out there, it ain't right. People who work construction or maintenance there, they sign these crazy confidentiality agreements. But rumors get out." "What kind of rumors?" He glanced around nervously, though we were alone in the store. "Medical experiments, government contracts, some kind of outbreak containment research. I don't know what's true, but I know people who took jobs there disappeared after a couple weeks. Just stopped showing up anywhere in town." Part of me wanted to dismiss this as small-town paranoia, but after what I'd witnessed on the road, dismissal felt dangerously naive. "Where's the sheriff's office? Even if it's closed, I need to report what happened." He gave me directions. 2 blocks down, left at the intersection, can't miss it. Then added, "But like I said, Sheriff Graves won't do much. He's tight with the Meridian people." I thanked him and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Your hand, you're bleeding." I looked down. What I'd thought was just a stain had fresh blood seeping through it, running in a thin line down my wrist. "It's nothing. Got scraped during the incident. You should clean that. Bathroom's in the back." In the harsh fluorescent light of the gas station bathroom, I examined my hand carefully. There was a cut across my palm that I hadn't noticed before, about 2 inches long, not deep, but still oozing blood. Must have happened when I was struggling with the door, perhaps caught on a piece of metal. I washed it thoroughly with soap and hot water, then paper toweled it dry before examining the rest of my arm. No other injuries were visible, but a strange reddish rash had appeared around the cut, spreading about an inch in every direction. It didn't hurt, but the skin felt warm to the touch. Unease crept up my spine. I remembered the blood on the strange man's hands, how it had smeared across mine during our struggle. Could something have been transmitted? The thought sent a wave of nausea through me. Back at the counter, I purchased antiseptic ointment, bandages, and a bottle of painkillers, ignoring the cashier's concerned glance. Outside, I applied the ointment liberally before wrapping my hand, then swallowed 2 pills dry. The sheriff's office was exactly where the cashier had described, a small brick building with a single patrol car parked outside. Despite the late hour, lights glowed behind the frosted glass door. I parked the rig on the street and approached, relieved that someone was there after all. Inside, a desk sergeant looked up from his computer, late 50s, overweight, with a bushy mustache and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Can I help you?" No warmth in the question, just professional detachment. I explained the situation, the abandoned truck, the blood, the attack. With each detail, his expression grew more guarded, his eyes more calculating. "You said this was on Route 27, about 30 miles outside town?" "That's right. Mile marker 142, approximately." He typed something into his computer, then made a call. "Chief, got another report about that situation on 27. "Yes, sir. A truck driver this time." "No, he's right here." He looked at me. "You injured?" I held up my bandaged hand. "Minor cut. I'm more concerned about the man I encountered. He needed medical attention." The sergeant's eyes lingered on my bandaged hand longer than seemed necessary. "Sheriff will want to talk to you. He's out on patrol but heading back now. Should be about 20 minutes. "I need to make my delivery before the warehouse closes," I said, glancing at the wall clock showing nearly 1:30 a.m. "Delivery to Meridian?" When I nodded, he continued, "They operate 24/7. Your delivery window won't expire. Sheriff Graves will want your statement before you head out there." His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. I settled into a hard plastic chair while the sergeant returned to his computer, occasionally glancing my way with that same unsettling scrutiny. The minutes crawled by in uncomfortable silence. My hand had begun to throb despite the painkillers, and the rash appeared to be spreading beyond the bandage, visible now at my wrist. Worse, a dull headache was forming behind my eyes, accompanied by a slight sense of disorientation. I was about to ask for water when the front door opened. Sheriff Graves entered like he owned the room, tall, lean, with close-cropped silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that assessed me instantly. His uniform was immaculate, despite the late hour, as though maintaining appearances mattered more than comfort. "You're the truck driver?" No introduction, no preamble. I nodded, standing to meet him. "Mitchell Wade, I know what you reported. Show me your hand." The directness of the request caught me off guard. I extended my bandaged hand, which he examined with clinical detachment, turning it over to check my wrist where the rash was visible. "When did this cut happen? During the altercation?" "I think so. I didn't notice until afterward." "And the rash? When did that start?" "About 30 minutes ago. It's spreading." He exchanged a look with the desk sergeant that sent my anxiety spiraling higher. Without explanation, he pulled out his phone and made a call, turning slightly away. "Dr. Bennett, Sheriff Graves. We've got another exposure case. Yes, advanced contact, Category 2. Delivery driver for today's shipment. Understood. He ended the call and turned back to me. Mr. Wade, we need to get you medical attention. I'll escort you to the facility where you're making your delivery. They have medical staff on site. I'd prefer a hospital, I said, alarm bells ringing in my mind. Nearest hospital is 40 miles away. The Meridian facility is equipped to deal with this specific situation. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon. I strongly recommend you cooperate, for your own safety. The implication was clear. I could go voluntarily or by force. My options had narrowed to effectively none. What about my statement? The man on the road? We'll take care of that at Meridian. They have protocols for these incidents. Protocols. Incidents. The clinical terminology only heightened my fear. Whatever was happening, it was obviously not new to them. The sheriff's knowledge of my exposure and his immediate contact with someone at Meridian confirmed what I had already suspected, a connection between the facility, the abandoned truck, and the man who attacked me. I'll need to drive my rig, I said, grasping for some measure of control. The shipment. Of course. Follow my patrol car, it's not far. As we exited the building, the sheriff placed his hand on my shoulder in what might have appeared to an observer as a friendly gesture. In reality, it was a firm guide, ensuring I moved in the direction he wanted. Outside, the night had deepened, and a strange fog had begun rolling in, hugging the ground in wispy tendrils. My headache intensified as I climbed back into the Peterbilt's cab. The rash had spread further, now covering most of my forearm, and the throbbing in my hand had transformed into a burning sensation that made gripping the steering wheel painful. Sheriff Graves's patrol car pulled away from the curb, lights on but no siren. I followed, fighting a growing sense of disorientation. The town of Kalinga slipped past, darkened storefronts, empty sidewalks, occasional houses with single lights burning in upstairs windows. Within minutes, we had passed through the small downtown and were heading out on an industrial access road that curved away from the residential areas. The road deteriorated as we drove, cracked asphalt giving way to patches of gravel. Chain-link fencing appeared on both sides, topped with barbed wire that gleamed dully in my headlights. Ahead, the sheriff turned onto a narrow side road marked only by a small sign reading, Access Road B, Authorized Personnel Only. Through the fog, a complex of buildings emerged, low, utilitarian structures surrounding a central facility that rose several stories higher than the rest. Brilliant floodlights illuminated the perimeter, creating a harsh contrast with the surrounding darkness. The entire compound was enclosed by more fencing, this time with evident security measures, cameras, motion sensors, and a guardhouse at the entrance. As we approached the gate, armed guards emerged from the guardhouse. Sheriff Graves stopped to speak with them, gesturing toward my truck. After a brief exchange, the heavy gate rolled open, and the sheriff waved me through. I followed him to a loading dock at the rear of the central building, where several people in white lab coats were already waiting. Among them stood a woman whose air of authority was immediately apparent. Tall, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely, and piercing dark eyes that fixed on me as I parked. The world tilted slightly as I stepped down from the cab. My vision blurred at the edges, and the burning in my arm had intensified to the point of becoming nearly unbearable. I stumbled, catching myself against the truck's side. The woman in charge approached rapidly, flanked by two men in what appeared to be some kind of hazmat gear. Not full suits, but protective clothing and respirator masks. Mr. Wade? Her voice was crisp, authoritative. I'm Dr. Bennett. We need to get you inside immediately for treatment. What's happening to me? My voice sounded distant, distorted in my own ears. You've been exposed to a pathogen. The cut on your hand allowed direct bloodstream access. She gestured to the men beside her. These gentlemen will help you to our medical wing. Time is critical. As they moved toward me, a moment of clarity cut through my growing delirium. Whatever was happening here, whatever I had been exposed to, surrendering to these people might be signing my own death warrant. The gas station attendant's warnings, the sheriff's suspicious behavior, the secrecy surrounding this facility, all of it suggested something far more sinister than medical research. but my body was betraying me. The rash had spread to my shoulder now, visible beneath my shirt collar. My temperature was rising, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool night air. And the pain, it was becoming difficult to focus on anything else. One of the hazmat men reached for my arm. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, I jerked away and made a stumbling run toward the open gate we had entered through. I made it perhaps 20 feet before my legs gave way beneath me. As I collapsed onto the rough pavement, shadowy figures surrounded me. A sharp prick in my neck sent ice through my veins, and darkness rushed in from all sides. The last thing I saw was Dr. Bennett standing over me, her face devoid of emotion as she spoke into a radio. Subject secured. Proceed with Protocol 17. Then nothing, white, sterile, silent. These were my first impressions as consciousness returned in slow, painful waves. I lay on a narrow bed in a room that contained nothing else except a stainless steel toilet sink combination in the corner. No windows, a single door with a small reinforced glass panel, bright fluorescent lighting that seemed to stab directly into my brain. I tried to sit up and discovered two things simultaneously. I was restrained with padded cuffs at wrists and ankles, and I was wearing what appeared to be a hospital gown rather than my own clothes. The realization sent panic surging through me. I struggled against the restraints until exhaustion forced me to stop. My throat felt raw, as though I'd been screaming, though I had no memory of doing so. When panic subsided enough to allow rational thought, I took inventory of my physical condition. The burning pain in my hand and arm had dulled to a persistent ache. I managed to lift my head enough to see that my right arm was heavily bandaged from hand to shoulder. An IV line disappeared into my left arm, connected to a bag of clear fluid suspended above the bed. Hours passed with no human contact. The only changes were the occasional adjustment to the IV drip via an automated system and the periodic dimming of lights that I assumed indicated night cycles. Unable to check the time, I marked passage by counting breaths, then gave up after reaching several thousand. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by vivid nightmares filled with blood in the vacant eyes of the man from the road. In one recurring dream, I was driving my truck down an endless highway, while something in the cargo area slowly broke free, scratching and tearing at the barrier between us. I had just awakened from one such nightmare when the door finally opened. Dr. Bennett entered, accompanied by a male nurse pushing a medical cart. She wore a surgical mask and gloves, but not full protective gear, which struck me as either reassuring or terrifying. I couldn't decide which. "Mr. Wade?" Her voice was as clinical as I remembered. "How are you feeling?" "Like a prisoner," I rasped, my voice cracking from disuse. "What the hell is going on? Why am I restrained?" She checked the monitors beside my bed, making notes on a tablet. "You've been exposed to a highly contagious pathogen. The restraints were necessary after your violent episode." "Violent episode? You don't remember?" She studied my face with renewed interest. "Approximately 6 hours after admission, you experienced extreme agitation followed by aggressive behavior. You attacked 2 of my staff before we could sedate you." I had no recollection of this, just the vague impression of darkness and confusion. I wouldn't do that." "It wasn't you, Mr. Wade. It was the pathogen affecting your neurological system." She gestured to the nurse, who began preparing syringes from the cart. "The good news is that we identified it early enough to implement an experimental treatment protocol. Your vitals have been stabilizing for the past 12 hours. What is this pathogen? What was in that truck?" Her expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps. "That information is classified under national security protocols. What I can tell you is that you've been extremely fortunate. Most exposure cases don't respond as well to treatment." "Most cases? How many have there been?" Instead of answering, she nodded to the nurse, who approached with a loaded syringe. "This will help manage the inflammation. You'll feel some discomfort." As the nurse injected the substance into my IV line, a burning sensation spread up my arm. I gritted my teeth against the pain. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. The answer shocked me. 3 days lost, with no memory beyond my collapse in the facility's yard. "My truck, the delivery. Your cargo was received and processed." Your employer has been informed that you experienced a medical emergency and are receiving treatment. What about the man on the road? The one who attacked me? Dr. Bennett's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He's been contained. Is he alive? In a manner of speaking. She checked my bandaged arm, unwrapping it partially to reveal skin mottled with dark red patches surrounding several surgical incisions. The pathogen causes systemic failure of major organs while simultaneously stimulating primitive brain functions, aggression, predatory instinct, survival mechanisms. The personality, the conscious mind, is effectively destroyed while the body continues to function. The clinical description made my stomach turn. You're saying he's like a zombie? That's what would have happened to me. Her mouth twitched at the term. That's a crude but not entirely inaccurate analogy. And yes, without intervention, your prognosis would have been similar. So I'm cured? I glanced at the restraints. If I'm better, why am I still tied down? Precautionary measures. We need another 24 hours of observation to confirm the treatment has fully neutralized the pathogen. She made another note on her tablet. If you continue to progress, we can discuss your release tomorrow. Release. The word should have brought relief, but something in her tone suggested conditions I wouldn't like. And then what? I'd just go back to my job like nothing happened? Not exactly. She nodded to the nurse, who began repacking the medical cart. There will be documents to sign. Confidentiality agreements with severe penalties for violation. You understand that nothing you've seen or experienced here can be shared. You want me to pretend none of this happened? That I didn't see a man transformed into some kind of monster? That I wasn't infected with the same thing and held prisoner in a secret facility? Her expression hardened. Mr. Wade, you need to understand your position. What happened to you was the result of a containment breach involving a classified research program. Discussing it would constitute a serious national security violation. So it was your truck on the road, your pathogen, that got loose. Anger built in my chest, momentarily overriding fear. How many others have been infected? Is that what's happening to the missing workers the gas station guy told me about? She stiffened. I don't know what rumors you've heard, but spreading misinformation can be just as dangerous as the pathogen itself. Is it really misinformation if it's true? The words came out before I could consider their wisdom. Dr. Bennett studied me for a long moment, then spoke quietly to the nurse, who promptly left the room. Once the door closed, she moved closer to my bed, voice dropping. Mr. Wade, I'm going to be very clear. You have two options. Option 1, you complete your recovery, sign our agreements, and return to your life with a generous compensation package for your troubles. Option 2 is considerably less pleasant and involves transfer to a long-term containment facility, where we keep individuals who pose ongoing security risks. The threat was unmistakable. You'd imprison me for knowing too much. We'd secure you for being potentially contagious. Her smile was cold. After all, experimental treatments sometimes fail in the long term. The implication sent ice through my veins. They could claim I was still infected, still dangerous, and who would question them? I'd disappear like the others, written off as another drifter who passed through town. Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights flashed in the hallway, visible through the door's window. Dr. Bennett's hand went to an earpiece I hadn't noticed before, her expression transitioning from irritation to alarm as she listened. When? How many? She turned away from me, voice urgent. Lock down sectors 3 through 7. Full containment protocol. She moved swiftly to the door without another word to me, pausing only to engage what appeared to be additional electronic locks before disappearing into the hallway. The alarms continued, accompanied now by distant shouting and the sound of running footsteps. Something had gone very wrong in the facility, and given everything I'd learned, I had a sickening suspicion about what it might be. I pulled against the restraints with renewed desperation. The padded cuffs had been designed to prevent injury, but that also meant they had some give to them. I twisted my wrist, ignoring the pain as the IV needle tore free, and managed to create a fraction more space. It wasn't enough to slip my hand through, but I could reach the buckle with my fingertips. Minutes of painful contortion finally yielded results. The buckle released, freeing my right hand. The remaining restraints were easier to unfasten. Soon I was standing unsteadily beside the bed, lightheaded from days of immobility and whatever drugs they had pumped into my system. The door was securely locked, as expected. The room contained nothing I could use as a tool or weapon except the IV stand. I dragged it to the door and examined the electronic lock panel, hoping for some obvious vulnerability. Finding none, I wedged the metal pole of the stand into the narrow gap between door and frame, attempting to create enough leverage to force it open. The effort proved futile. The door was solid, designed specifically to contain people who might become violent. As I slumped against the wall, catching my breath, the lights flickered momentarily. The alarms, which had been blaring continuously, cut out mid-wail, plunging the room into eerie silence before emergency backup systems engaged with a low hum. Through the door's window, I could see that the hallway lighting had switched to low-powered emergency mode, casting everything in a dim red glow. Whatever had happened had affected the facility's power systems. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to see farther down the corridor. Nothing moved in the crimson-tinted shadows. Then, just as I was about to turn away, a figure stumbled into view at the far end of the hall. A man in a lab coat, moving with the same jerky, uncoordinated gait I recognized from the road. My breath caught as he turned toward my door, revealing a face contorted in that same vacant, predatory expression. Dark fluid dripped from his mouth and nose, staining the front of his once white coat. He wasn't alone. Behind him, two more figures appeared, moving in that same disturbing manner. They hadn't seen me yet, but it would only be a matter of time before they noticed movement in my window. I backed away from the door, mind racing. Being locked in suddenly seemed less like imprisonment and more like protection. The infected staff members moved slowly down the hallway, occasionally bumping into walls or each other. Their coordination appeared worse than that of the man I'd encountered on the road, suggesting they were in earlier stages of whatever transformation the pathogen caused. A new sound penetrated the relative quiet. Gunshots, distant but unmistakable. Someone was trying to contain the outbreak, likely security personnel. The infected researchers paused, heads turning in unison toward the sound like predators tracking prey, then changed direction, moving away from my door toward the disturbance. Relief was short-lived. As the corridor emptied, the electronic lock on my door suddenly clicked, followed by the sound of the magnetic seal disengaging. The power fluctuation had triggered some kind of fail-safe in the locking mechanism, designed, perhaps, to prevent patients from being trapped during emergencies. Under normal circumstances, this would have been my opportunity to escape. But with infected personnel roaming the facility, opening the door might be suicide. I hesitated, weighing my options. Remain trapped in a room that no longer protected me, or venture into the facility in hopes of finding an exit? The decision was made for me when the door slowly swung open on its own, pushed by the automated hydraulic system. I grabbed the IV stand, my only weapon, and pressed myself against the wall beside the doorway, listening intently for any movement in the corridor. Nothing. The hallway remained silent apart from distant alarms that had resumed somewhere in the building. Taking a deep breath, I peered cautiously around the edge of the doorframe. The corridor stretched in both directions, doors identical to mine lining both sides. Signs indicated that I was in Quarantine Wing C. At one end, a set of double doors marked Security Checkpoint stood partially open, their electronic locks presumably disabled by the same power issue that had freed me. That would be my exit route, but it was also the direction the infected staff had gone. The opposite end of the hallway led deeper into the medical wing, with no visible exit but possibly fewer immediate threats. I chose the latter, moving as quietly as possible on bare feet across the cold tile floor. Each doorway I passed contained a room like mine, most empty, but two occupied by patients strapped to beds similar to the one I'd escaped from. Neither occupant appeared conscious, and I didn't stop to investigate further. At the end of the corridor, I found another set of double doors leading to a nurse's station and what appeared to be a larger treatment area. The station was abandoned, computer screens flashing warning messages, papers scattered across the floor, as though the staff had left in a hurry. A locker along the back wall yielded useful items, scrubs and slip-on shoes that fit reasonably well, replacing the flimsy hospital gown. No weapons, but a flashlight that worked despite weak batteries. Most valuable was an ID badge I found clipped to a lab coat hanging on a hook. It might grant access to doors that remained operational. As I was searching for anything else useful, a crash echoed from somewhere nearby, followed by a strangled cry that cut off abruptly. Someone was in trouble, and close. Against every survival instinct, I moved toward the sound, following a corridor that branched off from the treatment area. The justified fear was balanced by the hope of finding other survivors, perhaps someone who knew a safe way out of the facility. The corridor ended at a laboratory area, a large room filled with scientific equipment, computers, and what appeared to be specialized containment units along one wall. The crash had come from an adjoining room, whose door stood open, revealing an office space with bookshelves and filing cabinets. I approached cautiously, IV stand raised defensively. Inside the office, a struggle had clearly taken place. Furniture overturned, papers everywhere, a smashed computer monitor lying in pieces on the floor. Dark blood splattered one wall in a spray pattern that suggested arterial damage. A sound behind me, the soft scuff of a footstep, was my only warning. I spun around to find myself face to face with Sheriff Graves. For a moment I felt relief at seeing a familiar, apparently uninfected face. Then I registered the pistol in his hand, pointed steadily at my chest. "Moving around without authorization, Mr. Wade?" His voice was calm, controlled, though a sheen of sweat covered his forehead. "That's not following protocol." "What's happening?" I kept my grip on the IV stand, though it would provide little protection against a bullet. "The infected? They're loose in the facility?" "A containment failure in the primary research wing." His eyes were cold, calculating. "Unfortunate timing for your recovery, wouldn't you say?" "Did you know?" The question burst forth without consideration. "Did you know what they were doing here all along? Experimenting with something that turns people into monsters?" A tight smile crossed his face. "I knew they were developing weapons to protect our country. Sometimes protection requires sacrifice." "Like the people of Kalinga? The workers who disappeared? Were they sacrifices too?" His expression darkened. "You talk too much, Wade. That's going to be a problem." The subtext was clear. He had no intention of letting me leave this facility alive. In the chaos of the outbreak, another dead body would hardly be noticed. He could claim I had been infected, tried to attack him, given him no choice but to shoot. "The pathogen is airborne now," I said, a desperate attempt to distract him. "Dr. Bennett told me the final stage causes it to spread through respiratory droplets. You've been exposed just by being in this facility." It was a complete fabrication, but the flash of uncertainty in his eyes suggested it hit a nerve. His gaze flickered to the blood spatter on the wall, then back to me. "Nice try, I know the transmission vectors, blood and bodily fluids only." But he took an unconscious step backward, revealing his fear. "That was the original strain," I pressed, seeing an opening. "The one that escaped was modified, more contagious. Why do you think they locked down so quickly?" As I spoke, movement caught my eye. A figure appearing in the doorway behind Sheriff Graves. One of the infected lab workers, blood dripping from his chin, eyes fixed on the sheriff's back. I kept talking, maintaining eye contact with Graves to prevent him from sensing the approaching threat. "Dr. Bennett said the incubation period gets shorter with each transmission. Have you checked yourself for symptoms? The first sign is usually a headache right behind the eyes." Graves frowned, momentarily distracted by his own physical assessment. "I don't feel anything. You're just trying to—" The infected researcher lunged forward with that same unnatural speed I'd witnessed on the road. Graves sensed the movement too late, beginning to turn as bloody hands grabbed his shoulders. He fired reflexively, the shot going wide and shattering a glass cabinet beside me. I didn't wait to see the outcome of the struggle. As Graves screamed, a sound quickly transformed into a gurgling choke. I bolted from the office, leaving the IV stand behind in favor of speed. The main laboratory provided multiple exit options. I chose a door marked emergency stairs, hoping it would lead either up to ground level or down to some kind of service or delivery area. Either would be preferable to remaining on the quarantine floor. The stairwell was dark, emergency lighting providing minimal illumination. I clicked on the flashlight, revealing concrete steps heading both up and down. A sign indicated I was on sublevel 3. Ground level would be 3 floors up. I started climbing, moving as quietly as possible while straining to hear any sounds of pursuit. 2 flights up, I encountered the first evidence that the infection had spread throughout the facility. A body sprawled across the landing, wearing security uniform, throat torn open in a manner that left little doubt about cause of death. Stepping carefully around the corpse, I continued upward. At the door to sublevel 1, I paused to listen. Faint sounds filtered through, shouting, running footsteps, and the distinctive pop of gunfire, suggesting that security forces were still attempting to contain the situation. Rather than emerge into potential crossfire, I continued to the ground floor entrance. The door here featured both electronic and manual locks, the former disabled by power issues, the latter requiring a key I didn't possess. Pressing the ID badge I'd found against the scanner yielded nothing. I was considering my options when the door suddenly opened from the other side. I stumbled backward, raising the flashlight defensively, only to find myself facing Dr. Bennett. She looked considerably less composed than earlier. Lab coat torn and stained, hair escaping its severe bun, a cut above her eyebrow leaving a trail of dried blood down her face. Most significantly, she held a large security pistol, with the confidence of someone well-trained in its use. Mr. Wade. Her voice retained its clinical detachment despite her appearance. You've demonstrated remarkable resilience. What happened? I kept my distance, wary of the weapon. A cascade failure in the primary containment area. 3 specimens escaped simultaneously during a routine examination. She watched me with narrowed eyes. We've implemented Omega Protocol. The facility will be sterilized in approximately 15 minutes. Sterilized. Complete destruction via controlled demolition and incineration. Standard procedure for catastrophic containment breach. Her expression remained coldly professional. I'm leading the final evacuation of essential personnel. And non-essential personnel, the patients, the infected. Something like regret flickered across her face. Acceptable losses to prevent wider contamination. The pathogen cannot be allowed to reach population centers. The calculated callousness stunned me despite everything I'd already witnessed. You're going to kill everyone still inside? Your own staff? The infected are already lost. The others? She hesitated, then hardened. Sacrifices are sometimes necessary in the pursuit of national security. I recognized the echo of Sheriff Graves's words, the same justification for unconscionable actions. What about me? Am I essential personnel or an acceptable loss? She studied me for a long moment. You present a unique situation. The treatment appears to have been successful, making you the only subject to develop full immunity to the pathogen. Scientifically, you're invaluable. But politically, I'm a liability. I know too much. Precisely. She gestured with the gun. Which makes my decision difficult. Before she could elaborate, a thunderous explosion rocked the building, sending dust and debris raining from the ceiling. Dr. Bennett staggered, momentarily distracted, and I seized the opportunity. I lunged forward, grabbing her gun arm and forcing it upward as a shot discharged harmlessly into the stairwell ceiling. She was stronger than her frame suggested, fighting with the desperation of someone who knew what failure meant. We struggled for control of the weapon, our movements sending us crashing against the wall, then tumbling down several steps together. The impact separated us. I landed hard on my injured arm, pain lancing through the barely healed tissue. The gun skittered across the landing, stopping just at the edge of the next flight of stairs. We both lunged for it simultaneously. My fingers closed around the grip seconds before hers reached it. I rolled away, coming up with the weapon pointed at her chest. She froze, hands raised slightly. Mr. Wade, Mitchell, think about what you're doing. Her voice adopted a conciliatory tone I hadn't heard before. I can ensure your safety, your future. The facility employs people with your immunity as specialized containment personnel. Good compensation, important work. And if I refuse, you'll make me another acceptable loss? Her silence was answer enough. How do I get out of here? I demanded, fighting to keep the gun steady despite my shaking hands. Main entrance is sealed. Security checkpoint at the loading dock is the only exit point still operational. She spoke rapidly, eyes on the weapon. Take the stairs down to sub-level 2. Follow the red line in the corridor to Sector 7. Security code 4731 will open the checkpoint door. Vehicle bay beyond has transportation. Another explosion, closer this time, sent vibrations through the stairwell. Dust and small chunks of concrete rained down from above. The sterilization sequence has accelerated. Genuine fear showed in her face for the first time. We have minutes, not 15. I backed toward the lower stairs, keeping the gun trained on her. Why should I believe anything you say? Because I want to live as much as you do. She remained perfectly still. And right now, cooperation serves both our interests. Logic suggested I should force her to come with me as a guide and insurance. But the cold calculation I'd witnessed, the casual dismissal of human lives as acceptable losses, made me unwilling to keep her close, armed or not. Go, I said finally, gesturing toward the upper door with the gun. Get out your way, I'll go mine. Relief crossed her face briefly before the professional mask returned. The immunity in your blood could save thousands of lives, Mr. Wade. Remember that when you're deciding what to do with your knowledge of this place. With that final manipulation attempt, she turned and pushed through the upper door, disappearing from view. I didn't waste time pondering her words. I hurried down the stairs to sub-level 2, following her directions despite my distrust. The red line she mentioned was indeed visible on the corridor floor, a painted guide that led through a maze of laboratories and research spaces, many showing signs of violent struggle. I encountered 3 infected staff members on the way, their movements becoming more coordinated as the pathogen progressed in their systems. I managed to avoid 2 by ducking into side rooms. The third forced a confrontation that ended with a gunshot, the first time I'd ever fired a weapon at another human being, infected or not. The ethical implications would have to wait for later contemplation, if I survived. Sector 7 proved to be a large warehouse space connected to vehicle bays, presumably for receiving deliveries, including, I realized, the shipment I'd brought 3 days earlier. The security checkpoint was unmanned, its doors hanging open. Beyond, I could see several vehicles, including 2 unmarked vans and a familiar sight. My Peterbilt, apparently moved inside after I'd been taken. A third explosion, powerful enough to knock me off my feet, suggested time was critically short. The facility's sterilization was progressing rapidly. As I pushed myself up, I noticed movement in the vehicle bay. Several figures moving with that now familiar unnatural gait, blocking direct access to the trucks. There was no way to reach my rig without confronting them. The vans were closer, but I had no idea if the keys would be available. As I weighed my options, the decision was made for me by the sound of a massive structural failure somewhere above, a groaning, tearing noise that indicated the building was beginning to collapse. I ran for the nearest van, finding it unlocked with keys dangling from the ignition, presumably ready for the evacuation Dr. Bennett had mentioned. The infected noticed my movement and changed direction, shuffling rapidly toward me as I slammed the door and started the engine. The bay door was closed, but operated by a simple switch beside it. I floored the accelerator, crashing through 2 infected personnel who couldn't move quickly enough to avoid the vehicle. The impact was sickening, but unavoidable. Reaching the control panel, I kept one hand on the wheel while slapping the large button that would raise the door. Gears ground as the massive door began to rise, revealing pre-dawn light beyond. I didn't wait for it to open fully, accelerating forward and barely clearing the gap between door and ground, the van's roof scraping against metal with a shriek of protest. Behind me, the facility trembled as controlled demolition charges continued to detonate in sequence. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the doomed building. In the rearview mirror, I watched as the central structure collapsed inward, followed by a massive fireball that rose into the lightening sky. The incineration stage of the sterilization protocol. The access road stretched ahead, leading back toward Kalinga and what remained of normal life. As I drove, Dr. Bennett's final words echoed in my mind. the immunity in my blood, the knowledge I carried. What would I do with it? Who would I tell? Who would believe me? And more importantly, was Meridian's facility in Kalinga truly the only one of its kind? Or were there others scattered across the country, experimenting with pathogens that could turn humans into something unrecognizable? The rising sun illuminated the road ahead as I drove away from the burning facility, my future as uncertain as the answers to these questions. 1 month passed like a fever dream. I abandoned the Meridian van 10 miles outside Kalinga, wiping it clean of fingerprints before walking to the nearest truck stop. There, I used cash to buy a prepaid phone and called in a favor from an old trucker buddy who picked me up without asking questions. He drove me 3 states away, where I disappeared into the anonymous flow of interstate commerce with a new driving job under a slightly altered name. The wound on my arm healed into an unusual scar, a web of dark lines radiating outward from the original cut, like ink spreading through paper. It didn't hurt anymore, but occasionally itched when I was stressed or exhausted. Blood tests at a walk-in clinic showed nothing abnormal, though I wondered if standard medical equipment could detect whatever Meridian had pumped into my veins. News reports mentioned a chemical fire at a research facility near Kalinga, with minimal casualties and no environmental impact. No mention of pathogens, infected personnel, or the true nature of the facility's work. The corporate statement from Meridian Biosystems expressed regret over an unfortunate industrial accident and pledged to rebuild with enhanced safety measures. I monitored coverage obsessively, searching for any hint that someone else knew the truth. There was nothing, just the sanitized corporate narrative repeated across all platforms. Kalinga returned to obscurity, forgotten by a world that had barely known it existed in the first place. Sleep came reluctantly and brought vivid dreams. Dr. Bennett's cold eyes as she calculated my value against my liability. Sheriff Graves calling human suffering sacrifice. The vacant stare of the infected man on the road as he lunged at my truck. I would wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the scar on my arm burning as though freshly cut. The question of what to do with my knowledge tormented me daily. Go public? The story would sound deranged, with no evidence beyond my scar and testimony. Contact authorities? They might already know. Might even be complicit, as Sheriff Graves had been. Do nothing? The thought of Meridian continuing their work elsewhere, perhaps creating even more dangerous pathogens, was almost unbearable. It was during a haul through Nevada, 6 weeks after my escape, that I made my decision. I was delivering to a military installation outside Las Vegas. Nothing classified, just routine supplies, when I noticed the sign at the security checkpoint. Operated by Meridian Logistics, Inc., a subsidiary of the same company, operating on military installations across the country. The connection was clear, as was the implication. Their work had government backing at the highest levels. My story wouldn't just be dismissed, it would be actively suppressed. That night, in a motel room with paper-thin walls and the constant hum of the highway outside, I began writing everything down. Every detail, every name, every observation from my time in Kalinga and the Meridian facility. I included descriptions of the pathogen's effects, the facility's layout, the sterilization protocol they'd initiated, names, dates, locations, everything that might help someone connect the dots. When finished, I made multiple copies, sealed them in envelopes, and addressed them to news organizations, medical journals, and human rights watchdogs. I didn't mail them immediately. That would be too obvious, too easily traced. Instead, I distributed them gradually over subsequent weeks, mailing from different locations across 6 states. I knew the risk I was taking. If Meridian discovered I had survived and was spreading information about their operation, they would silence me permanently. Dr. Bennett had made it clear that my immunity made me valuable, but my knowledge made me dangerous. The calculation would favor elimination over recapture. So I kept moving, never staying in one place too long, always looking over my shoulder. The road became my refuge rather than my prison, the constant movement making me harder to track, the anonymity of truck stops and motels providing cover. I changed phones regularly, paid cash whenever possible, and developed the hypervigilance of the truly hunted. 3 months after the incident, I still hadn't seen any public response to my letters. Either they had been intercepted, or the recipients had dismissed them as the ravings of a conspiracy theorist. Hope began to fade that anyone would investigate, let alone believe me. Then came the first sign that someone was listening. A message left at the dispatch office of my current employer, supposedly from an old friend asking me to call. The dispatcher relayed it without suspicion, but the name used was one I'd invented as a signal in my letters. Andrew Keller, a fictional former colleague I'd claimed had disappeared after working at Meridian. I almost didn't make the call. It could easily be a trap, Meridian having discovered one of my letters and using it to locate me. But curiosity and the desperate need to know if someone believed me eventually won out. From yet another prepaid phone, at a rest stop hundreds of miles from my assigned route, I dialed the number that had been left. A woman answered on the first ring. "This is Rivera. You left a message for me." I kept my voice neutral, revealing nothing. "Mr. Wade." Not a question. She knew who I was. "Your letter was enlightening. I'd like to discuss it further." "Who are you with?" A pause. "Let's say I represent interests concerned about unregulated pathogen research, private interests, not governmental." "How do I know this isn't Meridian trying to find me?" "You don't." Her tone was matter-of-fact. "But consider this. If Meridian had located you, they wouldn't bother with phone calls. You'd simply disappear." The brutal logic was persuasive. "What do you want?" "Your blood, primarily. You claim to have developed immunity to a pathogen with no known cure. If true, that's extremely valuable." "To whom?" "To anyone concerned about biological weapons development. To anyone wanting protection against future outbreaks. To humanity in general." She paused. "And to you, as leverage and protection." I considered her words carefully. "If I agree to meet, how does this work?" "An initial meeting in public. If we establish trust, medical tests to verify your claims. If those confirm immunity, a more secure location to discuss long-term arrangements." Her tone remained businesslike. "We're prepared to offer protection, new identity, financial compensation. In exchange, we get exclusive access to your blood and testimony." "When and where for this public meeting?" She named a diner off I-80 in Wyoming 3 days later at 2 p.m. "Come alone, unarmed. I'll be wearing a red scarf. Order coffee and wait. If anything feels wrong, walk out. No questions asked." After she hung up, I sat in the truck stop parking lot for almost an hour, weighing my options. The meeting could be legitimate. Someone who believed my story and saw the value in what I carried in my veins. Or it could be an elaborate trap, Meridian having crafted the perfect lure to recapture their escaped test subject. In the end, curiosity and the desperate need for allies outweighed caution. I rearranged my delivery schedule to place me near Wyoming on the appointed day, then spent the intervening time planning escape routes and contingencies in case things went wrong. The diner was exactly the type of unremarkable roadside establishment that dotted highways across America. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, tired waitstaff going through the motions. I arrived 30 minutes early, parked where I could watch the entrance, and observed everyone who entered. At precisely 2 p.m., I went inside and ordered coffee as instructed. The woman with the red scarf was already there, sitting in a corner booth with clear sightlines to all exits. She was perhaps 50, with steel gray hair cut in a practical bob, wearing a nondescript business suit that revealed nothing about her affiliations. I approached slowly, coffee cup in hand. "Mind if I join you?" She gestured to the opposite bench without smiling. "Mr. Wade, thank you for coming." I slid into the seat, keeping my hands visible on the table. "You have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know yours." "Dr. Eleanor Rivera, formerly with the CDC's Special Pathogens Branch." She sipped her own coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "I left under contested circumstances when I raised concerns about private sector pathogen research. Like Meridian's work in Kalinga," she nodded slightly. "Among others, there's a growing network of facilities operating with minimal oversight, developing what they call defensive biological countermeasures. In reality, they're creating weapons." "And your interest in me?" Your blood carries antibodies to one of these engineered pathogens, a strain we've been tracking through its effects, but haven't been able to isolate or study directly. The fact that you developed immunity, rather than succumbing, makes you uniquely valuable. To whom exactly? You said private interests. She set down her cup carefully. A consortium of medical researchers, ethicists, and security experts working outside governmental constraints. We document and, when possible, counteract the development of illegal biological agents. Vigilantes, then? A tight smile. We prefer independent oversight. Official channels have been compromised. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Dr. Rivera asked detailed questions about my experience, symptoms, treatment protocols, facility security measures. I answered cautiously at first, then more openly, as her expertise became evident. She knew things about pathogen development that I hadn't included in my letters, lending credibility to her claimed background. Eventually, she placed a business card on the table with a phone number, nothing else. If you decide to work with us, call this number tomorrow between noon and 2 p.m. If not, destroy the card and we'll never contact you again. And if Meridian finds me first? Her expression darkened. They're still looking. After the Kalinga facility was destroyed, they accelerated work at 2 other locations. Your testimony could help us shut them down before something worse escapes. Something worse than what infected me? Kalinga was working with version 2.4 of the pathogen. The Nevada facility is already testing version 3.1, with enhanced transmissibility. The implication sent a chill through me. If the Kalinga strain had created such devastating effects in its victims, what would an enhanced version do? After Dr. Rivera left, I sat in the diner for another hour, turning her card over repeatedly in my fingers. The decision should have been simple. Align myself with people working to stop Meridian's research, potentially saving countless lives if another outbreak occurred. But years on the road had taught me that everyone had angles, hidden motives beneath stated objectives. What if Rivera's group wanted the pathogen for their own purposes? What if they were just another faction in the same dangerous game? My blood, my immunity, could be weaponized as easily as it could be used for protection. I spent a restless night in a nearby motel, weighing options that all carried significant risks. By morning, I had reached a decision based not on trust, which I had little left to give, but on calculated risk assessment. Rivera's group might have ulterior motives, but Meridian definitely did. Better to take a chance on unknown allies than face known enemies alone. At precisely noon the next day, I called the number. Rivera answered immediately. "I'm in," I said without preamble, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I maintain my freedom of movement. No secured facilities, no extended stays anywhere that could become a prison. Acceptable with reasonable security precautions. Second, my blood and testimony are used only to counter Meridian's research, not to create new weapons or pathogens. That aligns with our objectives. Third, you help me disappear. New identity, new documentation, new life far from highways and shipping routes." There was a brief pause. "That would mean leaving your current life completely behind. Are you prepared for that?" The question gave me momentary pause. What life would I be leaving? Endless roads, anonymous motels, a daughter who barely knew me, an ex-wife who had stopped caring years ago. The road had been my escape from personal failures, but it had become its own kind of prison, one I now had reason to flee. "Yes," I said finally, "I'm ready to disappear." "Then we have an agreement." Her tone remained professional, but I detected a note of satisfaction. "Head north on Route 287. At marker 142, you'll see a dirt road leading west. Follow it for exactly 7.4 miles to a cabin. We'll begin there." The number, 142, matched the mile marker where I'd found the abandoned truck months ago. Coincidence seemed unlikely, but whether it was a test or a message remained unclear. "I'll be there by sunset," I said. Then added, "How will this end, Dr. Rivera? What happens after you have my blood, my testimony?" Her response was measured but held a rare note of uncertainty. "Best case, we expose Meridian's operations. Their government contracts are canceled, and their research is placed under legitimate oversight. Worst case, We develop countermeasures to their pathogens and prepare for the outbreak they seem determined to cause, intentionally or not. And me? Where do I fit in those scenarios? That depends on you, Mr. Wade. Her voice softened slightly. You can disappear completely once we've harvested enough antibodies, living whatever life you choose with a new identity. Or you can join our work more actively. Either way, your contribution could save thousands of lives if Meridian's containment fails again. The choice she offered represented something I'd thought lost after Kalinga. Agency, purpose, the possibility of redemption. The road had been my escape for 15 years, but perhaps now it could lead to something more meaningful than just the next delivery. As I packed my few possessions into a duffel bag, preparing to abandon the Peterbilt and the identity attached to it, I examined the scar on my arm. The dark web of lines seemed less like a mark of trauma now, and more like a map, an unintended guide to a future I couldn't have imagined before that night on Route 27. Whatever awaited me at the cabin, whether Rivera's group proved to be saviors or just another kind of danger, one thing was certain: the long haul I'd been driving all these years was finally approaching its destination. Whether it ended in salvation or destruction remained to be seen. I took one last look at the truck that had been my home in prison, then walked away without looking back, heading toward an uncertain future that, for the first time in years, held the possibility of meaning. The highway stretched before me, but for once I wasn't following it. Instead, I turned onto the dirt road that led away from the familiar and into the unknown, carrying within me both a deadly secret and its potential cure. The blood of a man who had stared into the abyss of humanity's darkest research and survived to tell the tale. The long haul was over. Whatever came next would be a journey of a different kind entirely. I've always hated slow nights. There's something about the stillness of a small town after dark that just makes everything feel off. My name's Aaron Blackwell, and I've been patrolling the quiet streets of Mayersville for 7 years now. It's a town where nothing ever really happens. At least, nothing that would make the news. Until last night. It was 1997, around 10:30 p.m., and I was sitting in my cruiser on the edge of town staring down an empty 2-lane road. My usual patrol route took me past the same dead spots, abandoned barns, fields that seemed to stretch out into nowhere, and a few dirt roads that led deeper into the backwoods. It's the kind of place where you'd expect to find someone dumping a fridge or hiding from the world. Mostly it was teenagers trying to sneak a few beers under the stars. I didn't mind. It kept me from getting too bored. I've been married for about 4 years now, and if there's anything my wife Denise hates, it's that I spend too much time out on patrols. "Why don't you get a desk job?" she'd ask me. "Stay safe. Come home early for once." She's not wrong, I guess. The nights can get lonely out there, especially when your best company is the static from the radio. But the truth is, I like the quiet. I like the time to think. That night, the radio crackled, breaking the silence. "Hey, Aaron, you out by that old Milliken place?" It was Chuck, my partner. Well, if you can call him that. Chuck works dispatch, but fancies himself an investigator. He's also the kind of guy who lives for gossip in a town where people barely blink when you mention a crime. I picked up the receiver. "Yeah, what's up?" "We got a call from Mrs. Tilson. Said she saw some lights down by the tree line near County Road 12. You think you could check it out?" I glanced at the clock, knowing full well that if I didn't check it out, Chuck would spend the next 2 days asking why I hadn't. Mrs. Tilson had a reputation for getting worked up over nothing, but given the alternative was watching my dashboard clock tick by, I figured I might as well. "Copy that. I'm on it," I said. Turning onto the gravel road leading to the tree line Mrs. Tilson was probably losing her mind over. The road wasn't anything special, just a narrow stretch of dirt, worn down from years of farm trucks and hunters heading into the woods. The forest stretched for miles in all directions out here, so even with a full moon, the tree canopy made it feel darker than it was. I turned off my headlights for a second, just to see how pitch black it got. Total darkness, no surprise there. I flipped the lights back on and eased the cruiser down the road, the gravel crunching under the tires. I didn't expect to find anything out here. This was the sort of wild goose chase Mrs. Tilson was known for. Maybe a deer wandered too close to her yard and caught the light just right. People out here jump at shadows. But as I got closer to the spot where she claimed she saw something, I noticed tracks in the dirt. Not tire tracks, though. They were wide, deep impressions, like someone had been dragging something heavy. I stopped the cruiser, stepped out, and flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a knife, but it couldn't pierce the silence that settled in the air. I followed the tracks into the woods, the flashlight bouncing off the trees. There was an odd smell in the air, something metallic like iron mixed with earth. The deeper I went, the stronger it got. And then I found it, a shoe half buried in the dirt. Not just any shoe, though. It was old, dirty, but it was a woman's shoe. I crouched down, brushing the dirt away with my hand. The smell hit me harder then, and I realized what it was. Blood. Lots of it. Christ, I muttered, standing up, heart racing a bit now. I was about to head back to the car to radio for backup when something moved in the trees ahead of me. It was subtle, like a shadow shifting, but enough to make me freeze. I pointed the flashlight in that direction, and for a second I swore I saw something. A shape, tall and hunched, moving between the trees with a kind of grace that didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen before. "Aaron, you idiot," I told myself. "It's probably just a deer." But then I heard it, the crunch of leaves underfoot, deliberate, heavy, not like a deer at all. I took a step back, fingers twitching toward the gun on my belt. I don't usually carry it unless I'm expecting trouble, but I had it tonight. The sound got closer, the air thickening with a strange kind of tension I hadn't felt before. It wasn't fear, exactly, but my instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out of there. And then it stepped into the light. I'm not one for exaggeration, but this thing wasn't right. It looked like a person, at least from the waist up. Its arms were long, almost too long for its body, and it was covered in patches of matted hair and mud. Its chest was bare, slick with something dark and wet. Blood, a lot of it. But its face, God, its face, was stretched and wrong. The skin pulled taut like leather, its mouth hanging open in a way that made it seem like it was smiling. But there were no lips, just teeth. Yellow, crooked teeth, some of them cracked and broken, jutting out at odd angles. I didn't move. I couldn't. And it just stood there, watching me. I wanted to say something, shout, run, do anything that didn't involve standing still like a deer caught in headlights. But my brain wasn't working right. It was stuck between fight and flight, and neither option seemed like it'd help. The thing moved first, quick, like a blur of motion. 1 second it was 10 feet away, and the next it was in front of me. I drew my gun, fired a shot. The noise was deafening in the stillness, but it didn't stop it. The thing grabbed my arm, its grip like iron, pulling me toward it with impossible strength. I kicked out, managing to land a blow in its gut. It didn't react like a human would, though. No groan, no flinch, just a low sound like a hiss mixed with a wet gurgle. I scrambled back, tripping over roots, barely keeping my footing as I aimed the gun again. I fired 3 more times, each shot hitting its mark, but the thing just staggered, its body jerking with each hit before straightening back up like nothing happened. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. I ran then. There wasn't much of a choice. I bolted through the trees, the underbrush tearing at my clothes as I fumbled my way back toward the cruiser. The thing followed me, crashing through the woods like a freight train. It wasn't fast, but it didn't need to be. Every time I thought I'd put some distance between us, it would get closer, its heavy footsteps pounding in the dirt behind me. I saw the cruiser through the trees, the headlights still on, casting eerie shadows against the forest. I dove for it, slamming the door shut and locking it as if that would do anything. The thing was there a second later, slamming into the side of the car, rocking it on its wheels. I gunned the engine and floored it, gravel spitting out from under the tires as I tore down the road. In the rearview mirror, I saw it standing there in the middle of the road, its head tilted slightly, as if confused. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't stop driving until I hit the town limits, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins. My hands were shaking, knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I got back to the station, Chuck was there, leaning against his desk, munching on a bag of chips. "Everything good out there?" he asked, not even looking up. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah," I muttered. Just some deer." Chuck chuckled, oblivious to the fact that I was about 2 seconds from losing it completely. I didn't tell him about the shoe, the tracks, or the thing I'd seen. Part of me knew he wouldn't believe it. Hell, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. But I knew one thing for sure. That thing, whatever it wasn't done. And neither was I. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face. That twisted, stretched grimace that wasn't quite human. Denise noticed something was wrong when I came home, but I brushed it off as just another tough shift. I couldn't tell her what I'd seen. She'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The next morning I called in sick. First time in 3 years. Chuck seemed surprised but didn't question it. I waited until Denise left for her teaching job at the elementary school before heading to my garage. I kept a small lockbox hidden behind some old paint cans where I stored things I didn't want Denise to worry about. An extra pistol, some ammo, a hunting knife. The kind of things you might need in a small town where backup is 20 minutes away on a good day. I changed into civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, work boots, and drove my personal truck back out to County Road 12. In daylight, the place looked different. Less threatening, but somehow more wrong. The trees seemed to lean inward, creating a tunnel effect that made the road feel narrower than it actually was. I parked at the same spot I had the night before, the gravel still disturbed from my hasty exit. Looking around, I could see the drag marks more clearly now. They weren't as deep as I remembered, but they were definitely there, cutting through the dirt and disappearing into the tree line. I followed them again, this time with my hand resting on the butt of my concealed pistol. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like everything was holding its breath. No birds, no squirrels, just the occasional rustling of leaves in the light breeze. The shoe was still there, half buried in the dirt. In daylight, I could see it was a woman's dress shoe, black with a small heel, not the kind you'd wear hiking, which made its presence here all the more disturbing. I picked it up this time, examining it closer. The leather was worn and cracked with age, but there was something else. Small dark stains along the inside, blood that had soaked into the material and dried. "How long have you been out here?" I muttered to myself, turning the shoe over. I bagged it and continued following the trail. The drag marks led deeper into the woods, becoming harder to track as the ground grew more uneven. After about 20 minutes of careful tracking, I came to a small clearing. The clearing wasn't natural. The trees had been cut down, their stumps still visible but weathered by time. In the center was what looked like an old well, its stone rim crumbling and covered in moss. The drag marks led straight to it. My stomach tightened as I approached the well. The stones were old, maybe 100 years or more, arranged in a perfect circle around a pitch-black hole. I took out my flashlight, clicking it on and shining it down into the darkness. The beam couldn't reach the bottom. It just disappeared into nothing. I picked up a small rock and dropped it in, listening for the splash or thud that would tell me how deep it went. Nothing came. No sound at all, as if the rock had fallen into a void. "What the hell?" I whispered, leaning closer. That's when the smell hit me. The same metallic, earthy stench from the night before, but stronger now, rising up from the well like a physical presence. I recoiled instinctively, covering my nose with my sleeve, and then I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from deep within the well, like fingernails on stone, growing louder and more frantic with each passing second. I backed away, drawing my gun. The scraping continued, echoing up from the darkness, accompanied now by a wet, gurgling sound that made my skin crawl. Something was coming up. I didn't wait to see what it was. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush like a madman, branches whipping at my face and arms. I didn't slow down until I reached my truck, fumbling with the keys as I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing had followed me, at least not that I could see. But as I started the engine, I caught movement at the edge of the tree line. a dark figure standing between two massive oaks watching me. It was too far away to make out clearly, but I knew it was the same thing from the night before. I floored it, tires spinning in the gravel before finding purchase and launching the truck forward. In my rearview mirror, I could see the figure step out onto the road, watching me go, before disappearing back into the trees. I drove straight to the library. If that well was as old as it looked, there might be records of it somewhere. Mayersville wasn't big on preserving its history, but the library had a small local section with old newspapers and town records that might give me some answers. The librarian, Mrs. Joyce, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and thick glasses, looked surprised to see me. "Officer Blackwell?" she said with a smile. "Aren't you supposed to be on duty?" "Day off," I lied, trying to sound casual. "Doing some research on local history, the old Milliken property specifically. Do you have anything on it?" Her smile faded slightly. "Milliken? That's old history, bad history." That caught my attention. "Bad? How?" She hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. The Milliken family wasn't well liked around here. They kept to themselves mostly, but there were rumors. Disappearances back in the 40s and 50s. Nothing proven, of course. Disappearances? My pulse quickened. Young women mostly, travelers passing through. The sheriff at the time, Sheriff Rutledge. He questioned old man Milliken a few times, but nothing ever came of it. She sighed. The whole family died out years ago. Last one was Walter Milliken, died in '73, I think. Property's been abandoned ever since. What about a well on the property? An old stone one? Mrs. Joyce frowned, thinking. There might be something in the town records. Come on, I'll show you. She led me to a dusty corner of the library where several large leather-bound books sat on a shelf. Town records from 1900 to 1950, she explained, pulling one down. If there's anything about the Milliken property, it'll be in here. We spent the next hour poring through yellowed pages of tiny print, looking for any mention of the Milliken family or their property. Finally, in a record from 1927, we found something. Here, Mrs. Joyce said, pointing to an entry. Walter Milliken Sr. requested permission to dig a well on his property in March 1927. Permission granted in April of the same year. That wasn't much, but it confirmed the well was official, at least. Anything else? Maybe police reports or newspaper articles about those disappearances you mentioned? Mrs. Joyce hesitated again. We have some old newspapers on microfilm. But Aaron, why are you asking about all this? Did something happen out there? I considered telling her the truth, but decided against it. Just curious. The place has been abandoned for so long I was wondering about its history. She didn't look convinced, but didn't press the issue. The microfilm reader is in the back room. Newspapers from the 40s and 50s are in the cabinet under it. Help yourself. The microfilm reader was ancient, the machine humming loudly as I scrolled through old editions of the Mayersville Gazette. Most of the papers were filled with mundane local news, advertisements for products that no longer existed, and the occasional national headline. And then I found it. May 17th, 1948. The headline read, "Local Woman Missing, Foul Play Suspected." The article described how a woman named Ruth Wilson, 24, had gone missing after visiting friends in a neighboring town. Her car was found abandoned on County Road 12 near the Milliken property. The article mentioned that Sheriff Rutledge had questioned Walter Milliken Jr., but found no evidence linking him to the disappearance. I scrolled forward, finding more articles. June 1949, another missing woman. September 1952, a female hitchhiker last seen near the Milliken property. August 1955, a young nurse who never made it home from her night shift. All missing, all near the Milliken property, all unsolved. The last article I found was from October 1958. Milliken cleared in disappearances. Sheriff closes investigation. According to the article, Sheriff Rutledge had concluded there was insufficient evidence to link the Millikens to any of the disappearances and officially closed the cases. But it was the small paragraph at the end that made my blood run cold. Walter Milliken Jr. maintains his family's innocence, stating to this reporter, "What takes those women isn't human. It lives in the dark places, in the earth. It's been here longer than any of us. and it'll be here long after we're gone. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my brain. What takes those women isn't human. It lives in the dark places, in the earth, the well. Whatever I'd seen, whatever was dragging things into the woods, it was coming from that well. As I was about to turn off the microfilm reader, something caught my eye. A small article from December 1973, tucked away on page 6. Local recluse found dead, suicide suspected. The article was brief. Walter Milliken, Jr., the last of the Milliken family, had been found dead in his home on December 12, 1973. The cause of death was listed as a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. What stood out was the final sentence. A note found at the scene reportedly contained only the words, "I couldn't keep it in the well anymore." I sat back, my mind racing. Whatever had happened out there in the woods, it wasn't new. It had been happening for decades, maybe longer. And the Millikens knew about it. Maybe they'd even been protecting it, or containing it somehow. I needed to talk to someone who remembered those times, someone who might know more than what was in these old newspapers. And I knew just the person. Chapter 3. The Burden of Knowledge. Raymond Waters was Mayersville's oldest resident. At 91, he'd lived through pretty much everything the town had experienced in the last century. He still lived alone in the same house he'd bought back in the 50s, a small bungalow on the edge of town with a meticulously maintained garden. I found him sitting on his porch, watching the world go by with sharp, alert eyes that belied his age. He recognized me as I approached, a slight smile forming on his weathered face. "Officer Blackwell," he said, nodding toward the empty chair beside him. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Finally come to arrest me for stealing that candy bar in 39? I smiled despite myself. Ray's sense of humor was one of the reasons people liked him. "Not today, Mr. Waters. I actually wanted to ask you about something else. The Milliken family." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a wary, guarded expression. "Millikens? Why would you be asking about them?" I considered my words carefully. "I've been doing some research on local history. Found some interesting things about disappearances near their property back in the 40s and 50s. Ray was silent for a long moment, his rheumy eyes studying me. Finally, he sighed. "You've seen it, haven't you, out by the well?" A chill ran down my back. "How did you—" "Because you've got that look," he interrupted. "Same look Tom Rutledge had back in 55 when he came asking me similar questions. Same look Walter Jr. had most days of his life." He leaned forward in his chair. "What exactly did you see, son?" I described my encounter in the woods, the thing that had chased me, and my discovery of the well. Ray listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if I was confirming things he already knew. When I finished, he sat back and closed his eyes. "It's starting again," he murmured, almost to himself. "After all these years." "What is it?" I asked. "What's in that well?" Ray opened his eyes, fixing me with a stare that seemed to pierce right through me. "Nobody knows for sure. There are stories, old ones from before the town was even founded. The natives wouldn't go near that place. Called it the hungry ground in their language." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly as his old joints protested. "When the first settlers came here in the 1800s, they didn't know any better. Built farms, dug wells. The Milliken family was one of the first to settle. Took that piece of land because nobody else wanted it. Too many trees, not enough open ground for farming." "But they stayed," I said. Ray nodded. "They stayed. And things started happening. Livestock going missing at first, then people. Always near that property. Always women." "Why women?" I asked. Ray shrugged. "Who knows why it wants what it wants? But the pattern was always the same. Women would go missing, no bodies ever found. And the Millikens? They knew something they kept to themselves, but people talked. Said they made some kind of deal with whatever was out there." "A deal?" "Protection, maybe. Or power. The family never lacked for money, even during the Depression when everyone else was struggling. Some said they fed it, lured women out there." I thought of the shoe I'd found, the drag marks leading to the well. But the articles I read said Sheriff Rutledge cleared them. Ray let out a bitter laugh. "Tom Rutledge knew damn well the Millikens were involved somehow. But he also knew there was something else out there, something worse. Something he couldn't explain or fight with a badge and a gun. "You sound like you knew him well," I said. "We were friends," Ray admitted. "He came to me one night in '58, after he'd closed the official investigation. He was drunk, scared, said he'd seen something in the woods near the Milliken place, something that moved wrong, that wasn't natural." "Like what I saw," I whispered. Ray nodded. "He made a deal with Walter Milliken Jr. after that. The sheriff would stop investigating and Walter would contain it somehow, keep it from taking any more women from town." "And it worked?" I asked. "For a while. The disappearances stopped, at least around here. Walter became a recluse, barely left his property. Some said he was performing rituals out there in the woods, sacrificing animals to keep the thing fed." "Until 1973, I said, "when he killed himself." "Yes," Ray said quietly. "Left a note saying he couldn't keep it in the well anymore. After that?" He trailed off, looking troubled. "After that, what?" I pressed. "There were more disappearances, not in Mayersville but in neighboring towns. Women going missing without a trace, different jurisdictions, so nobody connected the dots. But I knew, and I wasn't the only one." "Who else?" I asked. Ray hesitated. "Your former sheriff, Bill Watson. He knew some of the history. That's why he had deputies patrol County Road 12 regularly, keep an eye on the place." Bill Watson had been sheriff when I first joined the force. He'd retired 3 years ago, moved to Florida. I'd never understood his insistence on regular patrols near the abandoned Milliken property, but I'd followed orders. "So what is it?" I asked again. "This thing from the well?" Ray shook his head. "Like I said, nobody knows for sure. Walter Jr. called it the hunger from below when he was in his cups at the bar. Said it was old. Older than the town, older than the country maybe. Said it slept most of the time, waking only to feed." "On women," I said. "On fear," Ray corrected. "The fear of dying women. That's what he said anyway. It feeds on terror, on that moment when hope dies and the victim knows there's no escape." He looked at me grimly. "Walter said that's why it keeps them alive for so long, why they never find bodies. It stretches out their fear, their pain, for as long as possible." I felt sick. "And now it's active again." "Seems that way." Ray nodded. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Report it to the sheriff, I guess." Ray laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And tell him what? That there's a monster living in an old well, eating women? That you shot it 4 times and it didn't die? He'll have you locked up in the psychiatric ward before sundown." He was right, and I knew it. Whatever was happening, whatever I'd seen, it wasn't something I could explain to others easily. I thought of the women who'd gone missing over the years, their bodies never found. Were they still down there somehow, in that bottomless well? "There must be something we can do," I said. "Some way to stop it." Ray was quiet for a long moment. "There might be," he finally said. "Walter Jr. kept journals, detailed ones. When he died, the sheriff at the time, not Rutledge, he was long gone by then, collected them as evidence. Far as I know, they're still in storage at the station somewhere." "Journals about the thing in the well?" I asked, hope rising in my chest. "About everything," Ray said. "His family's history with it, the rituals they performed to keep it contained, maybe even what it is exactly. If anyone knew the truth, it was Walter Jr. I nodded, standing up. "Thank you, Mr. Waters. You've been very helpful." As I turned to leave, Ray caught my arm with a grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. "Be careful, Aaron," he said, his eyes intense. "This thing, whatever it is, it's clever and patient. If it's awake again after all these years, there's a reason." I nodded, promising to be careful. But as I walked back to my truck, a thought occurred to me that made my stomach twist with dread. If the thing fed on the fear of dying women, and it was active again after decades of dormancy, it must have already taken someone. The station was quiet when I arrived, just a skeleton crew handling the afternoon shift. I nodded to Wendy at the front desk and headed straight for the records room in the basement. The old evidence storage was down there too, boxes of case files and physical evidence from crimes dating back decades. The basement was cool and dry, well maintained but rarely visited. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows between the tall metal shelves. Everything was organized by year and case number, a system put in place long before my time. I found the section for 1973 and started looking for anything related to Walter Milliken Jr.'s suicide. It took nearly an hour of searching through dusty boxes before I found it. A small cardboard box with Milliken W. Suicide, 12/73 inches written on the side in faded marker. Inside was a manila envelope containing the official police report, crime scene photos, and a sealed evidence bag. The report was brief, confirming what I already knew from the newspaper article. Walter Milliken Jr., 67, found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head on December 12, 1973. The gun was still in his hand. No signs of struggle or forced entry. A typewritten note found on his desk simply read, "I couldn't keep it in the well anymore." The crime scene photos were grim, but unremarkable for a suicide. Walter slumped in a chair, the back of his head a mess of blood and tissue. His desk littered with papers and books. A close-up of the typewritten note. But it was what I found in the evidence bag that made my heart race. A small, leather-bound book with the words, "Private Journal," embossed on the cover. This had to be one of the journals Ray had mentioned. I glanced around, making sure I was alone, then carefully opened the evidence bag and removed the journal. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it carefully, revealing tight, cramped handwriting filling every available space. The first entry was dated January 2, 1973, the year Walter died. "The dreams have returned. After 20 years of silence, it speaks to me again in my sleep. It knows I'm old, weakening. It knows I won't be able to maintain the rituals much longer. It's patient, but its hunger grows." I flipped through more pages, scanning entries. February 14, 1973. Valentine's Day. I remember Ruth. How beautiful she was, how she screamed. Father said it was necessary. One sacrifice every few years to keep it sleeping, to protect the town. Better one than many, he always said. I've carried that burden, the guilt, the knowledge. But I'm so tired now. March 30th, 1973. The spring equinox ritual failed. I could feel it stirring beneath my feet as I completed the circle. The offerings weren't enough. It wants flesh, human flesh, female flesh. It always has. June 21st, 1973. Summer solstice. The strongest time to bind it, but I'm too weak now. My hands shake. The symbols must be perfect, the words exact. I made a mistake in the eastern quadrant. Blood in the wrong place. It's testing the boundaries now, pushing against the seals. The entries continued, growing more frantic and disjointed as the year progressed. Walter described performing increasingly desperate rituals at the well, using his own blood, when animal sacrifices failed to appease the thing below. Then I found an entry that made me stop cold. September 15th, 1973. I found Father's old manuscripts in the attic, the original binding ritual from 1869. Great-grandfather Josiah wrote it after his encounter with the thing. He called it the Devourer of Hope. Said it was ancient, from before humans walked the earth, a hunger that lived in the dark places. It doesn't just feed on flesh, but on the terror that precedes death. On that moment when hope finally dies, and pure, unfiltered fear takes over. That's its true sustenance. I turned the page, my hands trembling slightly. The binding requires blood freely given and a life willingly sacrificed. Great-grandfather gave himself to it, lowered himself into the well with the ritual items. His sacrifice created the first seal. Every generation since, a Milliken has maintained that seal with blood and ritual. But I have no children, no heirs to continue the work. When I die, the seal will weaken. Eventually, it will break entirely. October 31st, 1973. Halloween. The veil is thin tonight. I can hear it clearly now, whispering in my mind, promising relief if I bring it what it needs. A woman, young, fertile, full of hope and life and fear. It's been so long since it fed properly. The animals sustain it, but barely. It wants more. November 20th, 1973. I almost did it today. Saw a young woman walking alone near the property. Pretty thing with long brown hair. I followed her half a mile before coming to my senses. What have I become? This burden has twisted me, made me into something I don't recognize. There's only one way to end this. The final entry was dated December 11th, 1973, the day before Walter killed himself. I've made my decision. The binding ritual requires a life willingly given. I will give mine, not to maintain the seal, but to strengthen it one last time. I've prepared everything according to the manuscripts. The symbols are drawn around the well, the words memorized. At midnight, I will complete the ritual, then end my life before the thing can take control of me completely. Perhaps my death will buy another few decades of peace. I pray it will be enough. May God forgive me for what I've done, for what the Milliken family has done for generations. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. Walter had killed himself as part of a ritual to keep the thing contained in the well, and it had worked for almost 25 years. But now, for some reason, the seal was breaking. The thing was awake again, hungry after decades of dormancy. As I was about to put the journal back in the evidence bag, something fell from between the last pages. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, revealing what looked like a crude map of the Milliken property, with the well marked at its center. Around the well were strange symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in a perfect circle. Notes in Walter's handwriting indicated specific items needed for the binding ritual. Silver knife, purified by moonlight, salt from the Dead Sea, iron nails, 7 in number, and most disturbing, blood of the willing, freely given. At the bottom of the map, in larger letters, the seal must be renewed at the dark of the moon. Only willing sacrifice will bind it. The dark of the moon. The new moon. I tried to remember when the next new moon was. 2 or 3 days from now, I thought. I carefully photographed the journal entries and the map with my phone, then returned everything to the evidence box and put it back on the shelf. As I made my way back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somehow the thing knew what I was doing. Chuck was at the dispatch desk when I emerged from the basement, eyebrows rising in surprise. "Thought you were sick today." "Feeling better," I lied. "Just came in to check something in the records." He nodded, not really interested. "Well, since you're here, you might want to know we got a missing persons report this morning. College student named Melissa Winters, 21. Didn't come home last night after studying at the library. Her roommate called it in." My heart sank. "Any leads?" Chuck shook his head. "Car was found abandoned on County Road 12, near the old Milliken place. Sheriff thinks she might have had car trouble and tried to walk for help. Search party's being organized for tomorrow morning." County Road 12, the Milliken property. It had already taken someone. "I want to join the search," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure," Chuck shrugged. "Sheriff's briefing everyone at 6 a.m. You know the drill." I nodded and left, my mind racing. The search would be pointless. Melissa Winters wasn't lost in the woods. She was down in that well, being kept alive by the thing, her fear and pain feeding it. And if Walter's journal was right, there was only one way to stop it: a ritual performed at the dark of the moon, requiring a willing sacrifice. I drove home in a daze, trying to process everything I'd learned. When I arrived, Denise was in the kitchen making dinner, looking worried when she saw my face. "Aaron, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Feeling a bit better, but still not 100%. She didn't look convinced, but didn't push it. "Dinner's in 20 minutes. Why don't you go lie down until then?" I nodded and headed to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. I took out my phone and looked at the photos I'd taken of Walter's journal and the ritual map. The symbols were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, but following Walter's notes, I thought I could reproduce them. The items needed for the ritual would be harder to get. Silver knife, purified by moonlight, salt from the Dead Sea, iron nails, 7 in number, blood freely given, and a willing sacrifice. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. What was I even thinking? This was insane. Rituals and sacrifices and ancient hungry things living in wells. I was a police officer, for God's sake. I should be looking for rational explanations, evidence, facts. But I couldn't deny what I'd seen in those woods. The thing that had attacked me, that bullets couldn't stop, the well that seemed to have no bottom, The history of disappearances stretching back decades, always women, always near the Milliken property. And now, Melissa Winters, young, female, taken from County Road 12, just like all the others. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this continue. Couldn't let that thing take more women, feed on their fear and pain until nothing was left. The next new moon was in 2 days. I had until then to prepare the ritual, to find the items needed, to figure out the willing sacrifice part. Because one thing was certain, I couldn't let anyone else pay the price for this. Not Melissa, if she was still alive. Not any other woman in or around Mayersville. Whatever happened next, whatever price had to be paid, it would be on me. My burden to carry, my sacrifice to make. The search for Melissa Winters began at dawn the next day. 20 volunteers, mostly local men with hunting experience, plus me, Chuck, and Sheriff Holt. We spread out through the woods surrounding County Road 12, calling Melissa's name, looking for any sign of her passage. I made sure to be assigned the area near the well, though I didn't mention its existence to anyone. As the others moved deeper into the forest in other directions, I made my way directly to the clearing, my heart pounding with dread at what I might find. The well looked the same as before, ancient stones arranged in a perfect circle around that bottomless darkness. But something had changed. The ground around it was disturbed, the dirt scraped and churned as if something had been dragging itself in circles around the well's edge. And there, half hidden in the disturbed earth, was a woman's watch, small, with a slender gold band. I picked it up carefully, turning it over. The back was engraved, "To Melissa, happy 21st, love Mom and Dad." My stomach clenched, so it was true. The thing had taken her, just like all the others over the years. I pocketed the watch and circled the well, looking for any other signs. Near the eastern edge, I found something else, marks in the dirt that looked like writing. Not English, not any language I recognized. The same strange symbols from Walter's map, freshly carved into the soil. The seal was breaking. The thing was getting stronger. I spent another hour searching the area, making sure to call Melissa's name occasionally, so the others would think I was still actively looking. Eventually, I made my way back to the meeting point, where Sheriff Holt was coordinating the search teams. "Anything?" he asked as I approached. I hesitated, then pulled out the watch. Found this near an old well in the woods, about a quarter-mile east of where her car was found. Sheriff Holt took the watch, his expression grim. "Definitely hers. Her parents confirmed she was wearing it yesterday." He looked at me. "What about the well? Any signs she might have fallen in?" "No," I said truthfully. "No footprints or disturbances that would indicate someone falling, and the rim is about waist high. She'd have to climb up to fall in." He nodded, looking troubled. "We'll expand the search area, focus on that section of woods. Good work, Blackwell." The search continued until dusk with no further signs of Melissa. As darkness fell, Sheriff Holt called it off until morning, though he sent 2 deputies to maintain a presence near where her car and watch had been found. I drove home, my mind made up. The new moon was tomorrow night. I had less than 24 hours to prepare for the ritual. The silver knife was easy. I had an old silver letter opener that had belonged to my grandfather. The iron nails I found in my garage, old square-cut ones from a renovation project years ago. The salt from the Dead Sea was trickier, but the New Age shop 2 towns over sold small vials of it for spiritual cleansing. I drove there first thing in the morning, calling in sick to work again. The blood freely given would be my own. And as for the willing sacrifice, I had made my decision during the long, sleepless night. It would be me. I would bind the thing the way Walter had tried to, and then I would end it once and for all. Better one than many, as Walter's father had said. My life for Melissa's, if she was still alive. My life for all the women who might be taken in the future, if this thing continued to feed. Denise knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her the truth. Couldn't burden her with this knowledge, this horror. I told her I was working a difficult case, that I'd explain everything soon. She didn't believe me, but she didn't press either. Just watched me with worried eyes as I kissed her goodbye that morning, not knowing it might be the last time. I spent the day memorizing the ritual from Walter's notes, practicing the strange words he had phonetically transcribed. I gathered the items, The knife, the nails, the salt, a small vial for my blood. I wrote a letter to Denise explaining everything, sealed it in an envelope, and left it in my desk drawer where she would find it eventually. As the sun began to set, I drove out to County Road 12 one last time. The night of the new moon was cloudy, the darkness almost complete without moonlight to illuminate the woods. I parked my truck well off the road, hiding it behind a stand of trees, and made my way through the forest toward the well. The clearing was different at night. The atmosphere felt heavier, charged with a kind of tense expectation. The well itself seemed to emit a subtle vibration, a low humming that I felt more than heard. I set my bag down and began the preparations, following Walter's instructions exactly. First, the circle of salt around the well, a perfect unbroken line. Then, the 7 iron nails driven into the ground at specific points, marked by the strange symbols I carefully drew in the dirt. The symbols were the hardest part, each one complex and alien, requiring precise strokes and angles. I worked methodically, checking my reference photos constantly, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. Finally, as midnight approached, I took out the silver knife and rolled up my sleeve. The ritual required blood at each of the 7 points, freely given by the willing sacrifice. I drew the blade across my palm, wincing at the sharp pain, and let my blood drip onto the first nail and symbol. "With my blood I bind thee," I whispered in the darkness, using the words from Walter's notes. "By iron and salt and silver true, I bind thee to the depths below." I moved to the second point, repeating the process. Blood on the nail and symbol, the whispered binding words. As I continued around the circle, I began to feel a strange pressure building in the air, like the atmosphere before a violent storm. By the 5th point, I could hear something moving in the well, a wet, slithering sound, accompanied by that same gurgling hiss I'd heard days before. The thing knew what I was doing. It was trying to stop me. "With my blood, I bind thee," I said, voice stronger now despite my fear. "By iron and salt and silver true, I bind thee to the depths below." The 6th point. My hand was throbbing now, slick with blood, making the knife handle slippery and hard to grip. The sounds from the well grew louder, more frantic. I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet. "With my blood I bind thee. By iron and salt and silver true, I bind thee to the depths below." One more point, one more binding, then the final part of the ritual, the willing sacrifice. I moved to the 7th point, knife raised to cut my palm again. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and weak, calling from deep within the well. "Help, please, help me." Melissa Winters, she was still alive down there. I hesitated, knife poised above my palm. If I completed the ritual, if I sacrificed myself, would she still be trapped down there with that thing? Would my death bind it but leave her to suffer? "Please." Her voice came again, weaker now. "Anyone." I had to get her out first. Then I could complete the ritual. I set down the knife and approached the well, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. "Melissa," I called. "Melissa Winters, I'm here to help you. I'm a police officer." There was a moment of silence, then her voice again, stronger this time. "Help me. I can't climb out. It's too slippery." I looked around frantically for something I could use to pull her up. My belt? Too short. I had a rope in my truck, but that was a quarter-mile away. Every moment I delayed, the binding ritual remained incomplete, the circle broken at the 7th point. "Hold on, Melissa," I called down. "I'm going to find a way to get you out." "Please hurry," she answered, her voice trembling. "It's coming back. I can hear it." I made a decision then, one I would regret for the rest of my life, however short that might be. I would try to pull her out myself, reaching down into the well. It wasn't that deep if I could hear her so clearly. I leaned over the stone rim, shining my flashlight down. The beam revealed wet, mossy stones descending into darkness, but no sign of Melissa. "Where are you?" I called. "I can't see you." "Down here," her voice came, seeming to move around the circular shaft. "Just a little further down." I leaned farther, straining to see. The stones were slick with moisture, treacherous in the dim light. My blood-slick hand slipped on the rim, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I would fall. I caught myself breathing hard. "Melissa, I need you to tell me exactly where you are." "I'm here," her voice whispered, suddenly much closer, right below me now. "I'm right here." I aimed my flashlight straight down and saw, not Melissa, not a woman at all. The thing from the woods stared up at me from just a few feet below, its stretched, lipless face contorted in what might have been a smile. Its two long arms reached up toward me, fingers like pale, boneless worms extending, reaching. I jerked back, falling away from the well, scrambling backward on all fours. The thing's arms shot up over the rim, grasping at air, then at the stones themselves, pulling its body up and out of the well with a wet, sliding sound like meat falling off bone. It had tricked me, used Melissa's voice somehow to lure me close. And now it was free of the well, half in and half out, its lower body still hidden in the darkness below, as it pulled itself up with those impossible arms. I lunged for my bag, for the silver knife. The ritual wasn't complete, but maybe the knife alone would do something. The thing was faster, though. One elongated arm whipped out, knocking the bag away, sending the knife skittering into the darkness beyond the salt circle. "Blood," it whispered in Melissa's voice, then in other voices, a chorus of women's voices overlapping. Freely given, willingly sacrificed. It knew the ritual. Of course it did. It had been bound by it for generations. It knew what I was trying to do. I backed away, looking frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. The thing continued to pull itself out of the well, more of its body becoming visible now. What I had thought was a human torso was actually something else entirely. A mass of pale, writhing flesh with no clear shape, constantly shifting and reforming. The only consistent features were the arms and that horrible, stretched face. As I watched, paralyzed with terror, the face seemed to split open, the mouth widening impossibly until it took up most of the head, revealing rows of jagged, yellow teeth. "Hungry," it whispered, the voice now a guttural rumble that bore no resemblance to anything human. "So hungry, so long, so many years." It was fully out of the well now, its lower body a mass of tentacle-like appendages that propelled it forward with surprising speed. It moved toward me, crossing the salt circle without hesitation. Whatever binding force the incomplete ritual had created wasn't enough to hold it. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. Behind me I could hear it coming, that wet, slithering sound growing louder as it gave chase. My truck was a quarter-mile away. I might make it if I could keep my lead, but what then? Drive away, leaving this thing free to hunt? To take more women like Melissa? To feed on their fear and pain for decades to come? No, this ended tonight, one way or another. I changed direction, circling back toward the clearing, but from a different angle. If I could get to the knife, complete the 7th binding point, then maybe. The thing was between me and the clearing now, moving through the trees with that unnatural grace I'd seen before. It was hunting me, tracking my movements, cutting off my escape routes. I needed a distraction. Something to draw it away from the clearing long enough for me to get to the knife and complete the ritual. My gun. I still had my backup piece strapped to my ankle. It hadn't stopped the thing before, but maybe it would distract it long enough. I crouched behind a fallen tree, drew the gun, and aimed at a spot far from the clearing. I fired 3 shots in rapid succession, the sound deafening in the quiet forest. The thing's head swiveled toward the noise, that lipless mouth opening in what might have been confusion. It hesitated, then began moving toward the sound, away from the clearing. Now was my chance. I sprinted back toward the well, searching frantically for the silver knife. The clouds had parted slightly, allowing a faint starlight to illuminate the clearing. I spotted the knife at the edge of the salt circle, grabbed it, and moved to the 7th and final binding point. My hand was still bleeding from the earlier cuts. I let the blood drip onto the nail and symbol, my voice steady as I spoke the words one last time. "With my blood I bind thee. By iron and salt and silver true, I bind thee to the depths below." The effect was immediate and dramatic. A shockwave seemed to emanate from the well, rippling outward with enough force to knock me backward. The symbols around the circle began to glow with an eerie blue light, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. From somewhere in the forest, I heard the thing scream. A sound of rage and pain and hunger all mixed together, inhuman, yet carrying emotions I recognized all too well. It was coming back, but the ritual wasn't complete yet. The willing sacrifice remained. Walter's notes had been clear. Blood freely given in the ritual to create the binding, then a life willingly sacrificed to seal it. Without both, the binding wouldn't hold. I picked myself up, knife still in hand, and approached the well. The glowing symbols cast enough light for me to see what I was doing. I stood at the edge, looking down into that bottomless darkness one last time. "I'm sorry, Denise," I whispered. "I love you." The thing crashed back into the clearing, seeing me at the well's edge. It screamed again, a sound of pure hatred, and lunged forward, only to be stopped at the edge of the salt circle. The binding was working, but it wouldn't hold for long without the sacrifice. I raised the knife to my throat, prepared to complete the ritual the way Walter had, with my own death. That's when I heard another voice, a real one this time, calling from the edge of the forest. "Aaron, stop!" I turned to see Raymond Waters hobbling into the clearing, leaning heavily on a walking stick, his aged face determined in the eerie blue light. "Mr. Waters, what are you doing here? You have to leave. It's not safe." "I know what you're planning," he called, still approaching despite the danger. "I saw the evidence box was disturbed. Found your letter to Denise in your desk when I went looking for you." The thing was throwing itself against the invisible barrier of the binding circle, each impact sending cracks of darkness through the glowing blue light. It wouldn't hold much longer. "You don't understand," I said. "The ritual requires a willing sacrifice. It's the only way to bind it permanently." Ray nodded, finally reaching me at the well's edge. "I know. I've known about this place, this thing, for most of my life. I watched Tom Rutledge break under the weight of this knowledge, watched Walter Milliken carry the burden until it crushed him." He looked at me, his rheumy eyes somehow younger in the strange light. "But it doesn't have to be you, son." Before I could react, he snatched the knife from my hand with surprising speed and strength for a man his age. "Raymond, no!" I reached for him, but he stepped back, the knife now held to his own throat. "I'm 91 years old, Aaron," he said calmly. "I've lived my life, a good one mostly. But I've carried the guilt of knowing about this thing for decades, doing nothing, letting Walter fight it alone, letting those women die." He glanced at the thing, still throwing itself against the barrier. "My sacrifice will mean something. Your life still has purpose." "There has to be another way," I said desperately. "We can find another solution." Ray shook his head. "No time. The binding's weakening, and I'm making this choice freely." He smiled, a genuine smile that took years off his weathered face. "Tell them I died peacefully in my sleep, an old man who'd lived too long anyway." Before I could stop him, he drew the knife across his throat with a firm, decisive motion. Blood sprayed outward, some of it falling into the well. Ray's eyes were calm, accepting, as he toppled forward into the darkness below. The moment his body disappeared into the well, the glowing symbols flared blindingly bright. The thing screamed one final time, a sound of such rage and frustration that it seemed to shake the earth itself. Then it was pulled backward, as if by an invisible force, stretching and distorting as it was dragged back toward the well. It fought, its two long arms clawing at the ground, leaving deep furrows in the dirt. But the pull was too strong. Inch by inch, it was drawn back to the well and down into the darkness. Its final scream was cut off abruptly as it disappeared below, a sound of ancient hunger denied. The glowing symbols pulsed once more, then faded, leaving me alone in the clearing with nothing but starlight and the memory of what had just happened. I approached the well cautiously, shining my flashlight down. This time I could see the bottom, not that far down, maybe 20 feet. Normal, solid stone, no sign of Ray's body, no sign of the thing. Just an ordinary well, as if the bottomless void had never existed. I gathered my things and left the clearing, making my way back to my truck in a daze. The forest seemed different now, just trees and underbrush, no longer charged with that sense of watchful malevolence I'd felt before. When I reached my truck, I found Ray's car parked behind it, a 20-year-old Buick that had seen better days. Inside was an envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. "Aaron, The note read in Ray's shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, then I've made my choice. Don't blame yourself. I've lived with the knowledge of what lurks in that well for too long, done nothing for too long. My time was short anyway. Doctor gave me 6 months last visit. Cancer. Didn't tell anyone, didn't see the point. Whatever happens tonight, know that you did everything you could. Some burdens are too heavy for one person to carry. Some sacrifices give meaning to a life that might otherwise end in pain and regret. Tell Denise you love her every day. Live the life I helped you keep. Raymond Waters. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket, then started my truck and drove home. The night was quiet now. The darkness just darkness, no longer hiding ancient hungry things. I never told anyone the full truth of what happened that night. The official story was that Raymond Waters passed away peacefully in his sleep, his body found by a neighbor the next morning. The search for Melissa Winters continued for weeks before being scaled back, her disappearance eventually joining the long list of unsolved cases in Mayersville's history. I check the well regularly now, part of my patrol route. The binding seems to be holding. The symbols Ray and I drew that night have faded from sight, but sometimes, if I look closely in the right light, I can still see traces of them in the dirt. I don't know how long the binding will last. A generation? 2? Eventually, someone else might have to make the same choice Ray did, carry the same burden. But for now at least, the hunger from below sleeps, and the nights in Mayersville are quiet again. Just ordinary darkness, nothing more.